Hello and welcome to CGTN special coverage of the inauguration of Joe Biden as US president. Before we get to the main event, news just in, at least 43 migrants from West Africa have died in a shipwreck off the Libyan coast. And the vessel capsized when its engine stopped in poor sea conditions after setting off from the city of Zawiya. The UN agencies for refugees and for migration say 10 people were rescued. And in more breaking news, a powerful explosion has taken place in downtown Madrid. Initial reports say it could have been a gas explosion. Local media has reported at least 6 serious injuries. Authorities have begun evacuating the area, including a nearby nursing home. We'll keep you updated across our later programs as the details emerge. All right, getting back to our special coverage. Well, today, Biden takes the oath of office at a swearing-in ceremony in Washington, D.C., where he will become the 46th president of the United States. I'm Jiayang in Beijing, and for a global perspective on today's events, we're joined by my colleagues in London, Nairobi, and Washington, D.C., with the latest as it happens. And first to Washington, D.C., where Joe Biden's inauguration is now underway. Barely 2 hours ago, Donald Trump left the White House as president for the last time. Trump, who becomes a private citizen in just minutes, is headed to his resort in Florida, skipping Biden's inauguration ceremony. Meanwhile, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, their families, and congressional leadership attended a prayer service at a church on Capitol Hill. Soon, former Vice President Biden will become President Biden. Let's head over to our studios in Washington, D.C., where Mike Walter is standing by. Mike, it's a historic but unusual day in the Capitol.
Absolutely, Zhao Young. Inauguration day here in Washington, D.C., one unlike any in modern history. In under 2 hours, Joe Biden will be sworn in as the 46th U.S. president, just 2 weeks after a deadly insurrection at the Capitol building. Between security concerns and the pandemic, the usual pomp and ceremony will be significantly pared down. Let's go straight now to Toby Muse. The day started with the 45th president leaving the White House.
That's correct, Mike. These are the final hours of the Trump presidency, and one of his final acts of president as president has been to sign this flurry of commutations and pardons, over 140. Some of those in this list, the rapper known as Lil Wayne, his former advisor Steve Bannon, who we should be clear, was facing charges relating to possibly misusing money that had been raised from Trump supporters to help build that wall between the US and Mexico. Donald Trump also rescinded one of his own previous executive order that forbids those who had worked in the White House from then lobbying government from the private sector after having worked there. Now, Trump then flew out of the White House this morning. He arrived to Joint Base Andrews, where he was given a 21-gun salute. He delivered his final speech as president to a group of supporters. He talked about his achievements over these 4 years. He claimed credit for rebuilding the military. He talked about the creation of this new division of the military, Space Force. The speech really had a tone of nostalgia as him talking directly to those who had supported him most. Let's take a listen.
The first thing we have to do is pay our respects and our love to the incredible people and families who suffered so gravely from the China virus. It's a horrible thing that was put onto the world.
Now, Trump at the moment is on Air Force One as it heads towards Florida, where he will begin his life his new life as a private citizen. Now, we are hearing that Donald Trump did leave a note behind for Joe Biden. This is a tradition in between presidents. They leave notes. And it's surprising, frankly, because Donald Trump did ignore the other tradition, which is to turn up to the inauguration of your successor. Now, speaking of Joe Biden, he arrived to Washington yesterday. He, with Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, attended a memorial to honor the 400,000 people who have died from the coronavirus. There were these 400 lights put alongside the reflecting pool, each light meant to represent 1,000 dead. Let's take a listen.
To heal, we must remember. It's hard sometimes to remember, but that's how we heal. It's important to do that as a nation. That's why we're here today.
And as you mentioned earlier, this is just a very, very unusual inauguration. This process happens every 4 years, and Washington becomes quite boisterous as tens of thousands of people come to show their support for the new president. This year, there's none of that. In fact, we're here downtown Washington, D.C. It's eerie how empty the streets are. And obviously, there's two reasons for that. The Biden campaign had said they don't want people coming and crowding given the health risks in the middle of a pandemic, but also, obviously, the problem of the security with that invasion of the Capitol by Trump supporters. So we now have a militarized Washington, D.C. Mike?
And Toby, while you've been speaking in the double box, we've been showing the events going on there at the Capitol as they prepare for this big day. We just saw Barack Obama and Michelle Obama arriving, a number of dignitaries beginning to show up. Now, right after he is sworn in, Biden is going straight to work. What can we expect from his first day in the Oval Office?
So Biden has been emphatic about this, that he's really painted his campaign as reclaiming America from these 4 years of Donald Trump. So naturally, he's talked about the need to really hit the ground running when he takes office. So there's a number of executive orders, 15 or so, he wants to sign in his first days. Some of them are just reversing Trump policies. So for instance, he wants to get the US back in the Paris Climate Accord. He also wants to get the US back in the World Health Organization. Another executive order is to make it mandatory to wear a mask when on federal property. Another one will be to overturn the Trump ban that affected mainly Muslim majority countries. And another one will be to stop funding for that wall that was being constructed on the US-Mexico border. But it's also a recognition by Joe Biden. He has serious challenges coming forward. He has a weaker than expected economy. He has this pandemic that's killed 400,000 and a deeply fractured, polarized population where sometimes people just can't seem to find common ground. These are all challenges for him to tackle once he becomes president.
Indeed, they are. Toby Muse, live for us. Thanks so much. Joining me now is award-winning journalist Frank Sesno. He is the former director of George Washington University School of Media and Public Affairs and currently heads the university's strategic initiatives. Frank, this is so carefully choreographed this day. It's often scripted in such a way it shows the peaceful transfer of power. I'm in the middle of A Promised Land, the book by Barack Obama, and in his book he talks about that drive over to the Capitol with outgoing President George W. Bush, their conversation. There have been some frosty drives over. Of course, Jimmy Carter lost to Ronald Reagan, but they made the drive. George H.W. Bush made the drive with Bill Clinton, who beat him. So talk to us about Trump's actions today. Are they damaging?
They're damaging. They're also reminders. They're damaging because the norms and the very important ceremony around the peaceful transfer of power, around the people's will being expressed through that peaceful transfer of power, have been denied today. But it also underscores that for all that denial and for all the violence that we saw a couple of weeks ago, it's happening anyway. And Biden has been very careful to sort of play down his own rhetoric, to not kind of one-up Donald Trump, who was a president who was in constant attack mode, to demonstrate how dramatically different the tone is going to be. So I think that what's going to happen today, driven by the symbolism of the COVID pandemic and the violence that we've seen and the division that we're experiencing, will nonetheless resonate in a very powerful way. And I don't think we should underestimate for a moment the very different tone and tenor that Joe Biden is going to strike. 4 years ago, when Trump spoke, he spoke in very dark ways in his inaugural address about carnage in America. Today, we're going to hear Biden talk about unity in America, and it's elusive, and it's distant, and it's going to be really hard for him to reach for. But I also think it's going to have a dramatic effect and going to have a very resonant theme and receptive audience.
So let's talk about tone and tenor, and let's start the day before his inauguration, because we saw it yesterday. It was on full display. Right. He talked about his son, Beau Biden. He shed a tear. He said farewell to Delaware, talking about it was in his heart. He served that state for 36 years as a senator. We already saw indications of a man who was willing to actually express empathy, tears, something that Trump was so much against.
You couldn't have a more dramatic departure from what Donald Trump has been, right? Here's Donald Trump, who never served ever in any level in public service or in government before he became president, versus Joe Biden, as you just point out, has had a lifetime in the Senate as vice president, serving the country. Donald Trump, who seldom talked about anybody but himself. And Joe Biden, who is constantly invoking his son, invoking other people across the country. Donald Trump, who didn't want to acknowledge COVID in any way, shape, or form, actually diminished it, attacked those in his own government who warned of its severity. And Joe Biden, who starts this inaugural ceremony and day, as you point out, by acknowledging 400,000 Americans who've already lost their lives to this. So this will be a very dramatic departure, both, as I say, in tenor tone, but also in substance, because one of the first and earliest things that the President Biden is going to do is to throw the federal government in all of its layers and levels at the COVID issue to get this vaccine deployed more rapidly and try to deal with the economic fallout from this.
We've talked a lot about Biden. Let's talk a little bit about the vice president-elect. This will be a very big day for her as well. Talk to us about the significance of her swearing in and what it means.
Huge. Huge. Here's an African-American woman, a South Asian American woman, first woman vice president. This breaks a lot of glass ceilings, and it's very powerful, too, at a time of great demographic shift in the United States. So, we had Barack Obama, first black president, and from there we swung to Donald Trump and a lot of the racism and other things that were themes throughout his presidency, highlighting the divisions. Now we come back today, in addition to Biden, as you point out, Kamala Harris to be sworn in. And I think when we see the first family photo of the cabinet and this enormously diverse cabinet that Biden has put together, Kamala Harris's role, obviously she's the 51st vote in a very divided 50-50 Senate, and the role of these others will really reinforce how much the United States has changed, how diverse it is, and the effort of this administration to highlight that diversity in moving forward.
It'll be fascinating to watch. Frank Sesno, always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for your insights. We will have special coverage throughout the day from our Washington Bureau on this historic ceremony, but for now, back to you in Beijing, Zhao Yang.
Definitely a lot of anticipation. Thanks so much, Mike. In the studio with me to offer us more insights into this transition is current affairs commentator Einar Tangen. Einar, good to see you. Now, Biden is taking over a country that's seeing rising COVID numbers, a faltering economy, and also a divided country. So that's a lot on his plate. What do you think are his priorities to tackle?
Well, first, unity. He needs to bring the American people together, and I think he's capable of doing it. You've seen the speeches that he gave when he left Delaware, when he was doing the memorial, and I think his speech today will be one that says, look, we have to come together, we have to heal. And, he is an empathetic person. I think he can do that. The second is the COVID-19 rollout. He has to do that. You've already heard the commentary on that. He's going to press every resource he possibly can into that. Mm-hmm. And while that is happening, he needs to take care of the people who are being hurt, who are threatened by eviction, who have lost their job or about to lose their businesses. The U.S. cannot afford to have the lifeblood of its economy, its small businesses, basically destroyed during this period. So this will not be the last aid package that he pushes. It will be the first of many, depending on when COVID-19 is finally brought under control.
Well, on that topic, I want to draw your attention to what we heard earlier, a snippet from Donald Trump's final remarks. And he mentioned about the China virus once again and said along the lines of a terrible thing that was put on the world. This is the kind of rhetoric that frayed relations with China. Is this a kind of attitude that we could see continue with Biden? Any indication of this?
No, you're not going to hear so much about the origins of the virus as much as trying to handle what's coming. But, Trump was mixed a new narrative with an old narrative. The old narrative is blame China for everything. But the new narrative is this idea that he laid the foundation. So he's really looking towards 2024. Anything good happens, he's going to claim credit for it. Anything bad happens, that's Biden's fault. And, then he goes. Now, the reality is in 3.5 years from now, China is going to continue to be stronger. So this will become one of the main election issues that he, or possibly his surrogate Pompeo, will be using. They'll say, look, I told you many years ago it was time to confront China, and this administration didn't. They've grown stronger. Elect me and I will take care of it, because the reality is that China will be stronger, but it has nothing to do with the policies of Donald Trump to contain it. In fact, China is stronger today than it was when Donald Trump first took office.
All right, I will definitely be talking more about foreign policy later in the show. And of course, you're staying with us throughout this coverage. Thanks so much, Einar. We're watching special coverage of the US presidential inauguration. Coming up, European leaders say they are relieved to have a friend in the White House once again. Our London desk has more on the EU and UK reactions to President-elect Biden's policy plans.
It takes a lot to become President of the United States. A strong vision, stellar communication skills, political prowess, charisma, and money. Loads of money. So what was the price tag for the 2020 US presidential election? Joe Biden, Donald Trump, and other candidates spent an estimated $6.6 billion on the campaign trail. This makes it the costliest US election ever, greater than the GDP of the Maldives, Fiji, Sierra Leone, and Bhutan. Trump had his eyes on a second term as soon as he took office in 2017.
So we're going to keep making America great again.
And went on to raise $774 million to support his venture. Biden, on the other hand, raised significantly more, $1 billion. So where did the money come from? Despite COVID-19 disruptions, the 2020 election saw a surge in small dollar donations amid extraordinary enthusiasm from US voters. Donations below $200 accounted for over 50% of both Biden's and Trump's fundraisings. Biden secured more money from small donors than his main rival did, pulling in $643 million compared with the $475 million that Trump received in small amounts. Industries also contributed cash to the candidates, and their generous giving provides a snapshot of the political leanings of different sectors. The biggest industries represented by Biden donors included finance, securities and investment, education, and law firms. Meanwhile, Trump's major donor base included sectors like health services, gambling, and real estate. Rich supporters of both candidates also dug deep into their pockets. Former Democratic presidential candidate Michael Bloomberg was Biden's biggest supporter, giving away at least $56 million. Trump's biggest contributors were casino mogul Sheldon Adelson and his wife Miriam Adelson, with $75 million to Preserve America PAC, which supported Trump's re-election. Geographically speaking, California, Washington, D.C., and New York contributed the most to Biden's fundraising efforts, while Trump pulled in donations mainly from California, Texas, and Florida. Even though more money was donated to Trump in Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, Wisconsin, and Michigan, the 5 states were blue during the election. Now, where did all this money go? The coronavirus pandemic sparked changes in the way presidential campaigns used their money. Candidates spent less on travel and fundraising events compared with the 2016 election, but shelled out more cash on media. More than 2/3 of the dollars spent by the campaigns were on media exposure. For Biden, that figure was 80% of all campaign expenditures. For Trump, 66%. The Biden campaign spent considerably more than the Trump campaign on local cable advertising, $82 million versus $12 million. While Trump's campaign reserved its largest share for digital ads, including on Facebook and Google. Biden's campaign spent most in Georgia, Virginia, and Washington, D.C., while Trump focused on Virginia, New York, and Washington, D.C. Biden outspent Trump in Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, and that investment paid off. The 3 states flipped from red to blue. For U.S. presidential hopefuls, it pays to spend big on the campaign trail. Money might not be the deciding factor in elections, but top spenders in general have higher chances of winning the White House race. The 2016 election was an exception, but this year, the formula held true again.
Well, the last 4 years have upended the usual cordial relationship between the US and Europe. Time and again, Donald Trump gave his transatlantic allies the cold shoulder, heaping criticism on NATO, withdrawing from the Paris Climate Accord, and imposing economic sanctions on EU goods. But even as he cooled towards Europe, President Trump intrigued the world with his warmth towards Russia. In a moment, we'll talk to our correspondent Lucy Hoff in Brussels for EU reaction, Stuart Smith in Moscow for Russia's take on the presidential change. First, Andrew Wilson for a closer look at the so-called UK special relationship. Andrew, Boris Johnson has been described by some rather unkind critics as a British Donald Trump. Now, with President Biden, how will London reset its diplomatic relationship with the United States?
It's a good question, Jamie, because all the goalposts have been moved anyway by the pandemic. Foreign policy doesn't carry the same weight at the moment that it would have done under any other occasion, and that's where we will be looking for signs of agreement and possible harmony between Downing Street and the White House. Boris Johnson did have an easier time with Donald Trump than previous Prime Minister Theresa May, who in fact was at pains to point that out recently in the Houses of Parliament, saying that Boris Johnson had reneged on the deal in Northern Ireland and had been less than generous with his foreign aid budget, all designed to show Boris Johnson up to the international audience, if they're looking, that he's not necessarily the world's most trustworthy character. But that aside, there are two arenas where UK has the perfect chance to rebuild, and that will be the environment talks in Glasgow in November, COP26, and also the G7, which is being held in Cornwall in southwest England this year in June, both being hosted by the UK, so both chances to indulge the Americans and the White House administration in issues very close to their heart, particularly the environment. Now, John Kerry will be running the environment programme. He's, of course, one of the architects of the Paris Accords, so he'll be looking for signs that the UK is serious about that. And also the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, is an experienced diplomat, having cut his teeth in the Obama administration. He'll also be looking for signs that the UK is serious about taking on board big global issues like the environment. Nonetheless, for now, though, Boris Johnson went through the protocols and congratulated the new President Biden in the House of Commons today.
Mr. Speaker, I know members from across the House will want to join me and echo you in congratulating President-elect Biden on his inauguration later today. As I said when I spoke with him on his election as president, I look forward to working with him and with his new administration, strengthening the partnership between our countries and working on our shared priorities, from tackling climate change, building back better from the pandemic, and strengthening our transatlantic security.
Andrew, as you alluded to, Joe Biden never a supporter of Brexit. Now the UK is outside the EU. How do you see the special relationship developing under this new US administration?
I think there are a lot of unknowns in that, Jamie. I think, first of all, we should be clear that Joe Biden has an awful lot on his in-tray concerning domestic issues to start with. The pandemic in America, vaccinations, disunity in the Houses of Congress. He has a lot to work on at home. So foreign policy might not be his first issue. However, the UK traditionally has been Europe's point man for the White House, and that may now have been subtly changed by the dynamics of Brexit. For a start, this is a government in Downing Street in Westminster which is experienced more in defiance of isolation than anything else. It's used to pushing back against Brussels and pushing back against Remainers, and Joe Biden himself is just a consensus builder. He'll be looking for alliances on security, alliances on the economy. He'll be wanting to get back involved with the World Health Organization. He'll be wanting to get back involved with environmental issues. He'll be looking for a common purpose in terms of how to deal with Moscow and Russia, how to deal with Beijing and China, all these things. He'll be looking for allies. and he'll be wondering whether or not London can provide that kind of point position that it did in previous times. It was Gordon Brown as Prime Minister who helped the Americans so much with the international banking crisis because of his knowledge and because of his foothold in the European community. Without that foothold, how useful will London be to the White House? Well, they'll have been looking at it carefully, but thus far, it's not clear to see exactly which direction that dynamic will take.
Andrew Wilson on the UK relationship with the new US administration. Well, Europe has a friend in the White House. The European Commission President says so. Hours before Biden's inauguration, the EU is calling on the new US President to form a new transatlantic relationship. Let's talk to Lucy Hoff in Brussels. Lucy, what are EU leaders saying about the new US President?
Well, after 4 tumultuous and difficult years in terms of EU-US relations, there is talk here of a new dawn in the transatlantic alliance. Ursula von der Leyen, the EU Commission President, stood in the European Parliament this morning talking about an opportunity to renew the transatlantic alliance with an old ally, but to set a new agenda. That was sentiment shared by EU Council President Charles Michel, who spoke of his relief about the inauguration of President Biden, urging him to form a new EU-US founding pact to work together on shared values on things like climate change, defence and gender equality. So here's what EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen had to say this morning, speaking in the European Parliament.
This time-honoured ceremony on the steps of the US Capitol will be a demonstration of the resilience of American democracy and the resounding proof that, once again, after 4 long years, Europe has a friend in the White House.
Lucy, how does the EU really see future ties with the United States?
Well, on the one hand, as Andrew was alluding to there, this is the opportunity to return to multilateral institutions. Joe Biden's clear support for bodies like NATO, his desire to rejoin and re-engage with the WHO, but also, of course, the Paris Climate Accord, with both sides of the Atlantic really sharing a huge priority for climate change in the months to come, particularly with COP26 coming up at the end of this year. So there is a lot of shared values there. The Iran nuclear accord as well, which Joe Biden has said he will work to rejoin to. So a number of common interests, but the EU is also sort of feeling that perhaps, as Andrew again was alluding to there, that Joe Biden will be consumed by a heavy domestic agenda with all that is going on closer to home in the States in terms of healing the divisions in American society, really building society after the coronavirus pandemic, with very much the pandemic still going on there at the moment. So perhaps foreign policy won't be his priority at the moment. There is a feeling amongst some European leaders that they still need to be prepared to go it alone, to continue to pursue that strategic autonomy that's become a real catchphrase here, and start to assert itself on the global stage without that traditional ally.
Lucy Hoff with the EU's take on the new president. Thank you very much. You're watching CGTN. These are live pictures from Washington as the new president of the United States, Joe Biden, arrives for his inauguration. Now, we'll stay on those live pictures. We've been hearing from the UK's perspective on the new president and the EU. Let's talk about Russia. The Kremlin says any improvement in relationships with the United States will depend on Joe Biden. Tensions have increased over the past 4 years under President Trump, fueled by allegations of Russia's meddling in US elections, cyber attacks, and conflicts in Ukraine and Syria. While we stay on these live pictures of the arrival of Joe Biden, let's bring in our correspondent, Stuart Smith, who's watching events for us in Moscow. Stuart, where is the Moscow-US relationship heading under this new Joe Biden administration?
Well, despite President Trump's best efforts to be incredibly friendly with President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, relations at the end of his presidency are actually in a very, very cool state. Even earlier today, further sanctions were imposed on Russia. Not a good start for Joe Biden if he wanted to start in a position of strength. However, Joe Biden himself has already made many comments talking about Russia as an opponent, talking about Russia as the United States' main opposition. And even the National Security Advisor, talking about the recent cyber attacks, says that sanctions are likely to be on their way. So Russia, in the words of President Putin's press secretary, is not expecting anything good from this new administration. It says it's willing to work with the United States if they get a sense of mutual desire to work together on certain bilateral issues, but Russia is under no impression that Joe Biden, as President of the United States, makes anything easier for them.
And just a thought about the nuclear arms treaty between Russia and the United States. That's soon going to expire, isn't it?
Very soon, and so soon that not everyone is convinced that it could be renewed in time, despite the fact that both President Joe Biden and Russia's President Putin would like it to be renewed. It's one of the few areas of cooperation that we could see coming very quickly after Joe Biden becomes president, because it's something that is very important to both countries. It prevents an arms race, in effect, by guaranteeing the number of nuclear weapons allowed in each country. It's something Donald Trump looked into renewing, but the details caused the negotiations to collapse, and in the end Donald Trump saw no interest in trying to renew it. However, President Putin has said he would like to see a one-year deal as a starting point for this treaty, and analysts expect that mutual cooperation here could potentially be a starting point for future positive relations down the line, but definitely the Kremlin is not expecting much here from a new US president, who was the person at the time in 2014 that imposed big sanctions on Russia for the alleged invasion of Crimea.
The voice there of Stuart Smith, our correspondent in Moscow, and we heard too from our correspondents Lucy Hoff in Brussels and Andrew Wilson in Oxford too. Now we'll stay on these live pictures from Washington. You're watching CGTN and the build-up to the inauguration of Joe Biden as President of the United States of America. While we watch those pictures, let's bring in another of our special guests with Joe Biden in the White House. How will the US-Europe relationship fare in the coming years? Piotr Kaczynski is an Associate Research Fellow with the Europam Institute for European Policy. I'm delighted to welcome to the programme. Thank you very much for your time. How would you summarise 4 years of European and Donald Trump relations?
Hello, good. Thank you for having me. Well, 4 years of having Donald Trump in the White House with Europe was like a cold shower, if not a cold war. So right now with Joe Biden, everybody's expecting more of a détente, meaning that Europeans have learned that America sometimes is not pro-European. And this new Europe that has emerged after 4 years is without Britain, and it is much more self-aware about what it wants from the world. So we've seen, for example, two elements coming lately in regards to the American new president is that US is not very happy about EU-China investment agreement, as well as only this week, the European Commission has put forward an idea to promote further euro as an international currency against the dollar.
Well, thank you very much indeed for your time. I had hoped that we would have much longer to discuss that relationship, but as you'll understand, on a day like today, we're following the main event in Washington. You're watching CGTN Live, and we are going to return now to our special coverage of Joe Biden's inauguration. And as we watch the live pictures, ask what would a closer relationship between the US and EU mean for China? So let me return you now to my colleague Zhao Yang watching in Beijing.
Well, that's exactly right, Jamie. And we'll have Einar Tangen to answer that question for us in a moment. But we do have some news just in. A miner who is amongst the 22 trapped in a gold mine in the eastern province of Shandong in China for 11 days is presumed dead after falling into a coma due to severe head injury. His fellow miners confirmed the information in a phone call with rescuers. The miners have been trapped since January 10th after an explosion in the mine, which is located near the city of Yantai. Now, rescue operations are still underway, and we'll make sure to keep you updated. Well, let's get back to the inauguration and all the build-up and the transitions. And Aina, so we were listening there about how the EU and the US could see perhaps closer ties or reset ties after Biden takes office. Now, they do share some similar standpoints on China. Do you think we might see a coordinated policy from the EU and the US?
In terms of political rhetoric, values, human rights and things like that, yes, you will see a lot of lip service. But on the economic front, you have to remember the EU and the US are in essence competitors. Everything that the US makes, the Europeans make, and vice versa. They make airplanes, cars, both sides, etc. And they're both in the high-tech areas. So it's going to be a situation where, with the economic downturn the way it is, with negative over 4% world growth, the EU is looking to be about over 7.5% negative growth this time around. US is somewhere around 3.6, or it's estimated there. So it's going to be a free-for-all. It's going to be, the EU is looking out for itself. They've seen what has happened when they've relied on the US. As I said before, 44,000 votes and 3 states would have changed the tenure of this election. Donald Trump would have probably continued to be president. And under those circumstances, the EU has to be concerned that, is the US a reliable partner, or is it simply some sort of seesaw match where you have one group come in and they seem very friendly, and then the next group comes in and they reverse all the policies. We've seen that with Obama to Trump, and now Biden is going back. So there are real questions that can only be settled by trust building and by time, and that is going to be the real issue here. In terms of China, China represents markets. You cannot go forward and today as a business unless you have a growth plan. Your stock depends on it. Your board will be asking you, and that means that you have to have a China program. You have to have something where you say, this is how we're going to be in that market. And you can see that the economic realities this has been the highest inflows of foreign direct investment into China of any year. It was up just over 4% since last year, which was a record year. So it tells you that in one sense, there's this rhetoric going one way and the economic realities the other.
And the economic realities might mean more pragmatic relationships between China and the EU. Well, thanks, Aina. Now, you're watching our live coverage of President-elect Joe Biden's inauguration. Up next, all signs point to Biden reversing Trump's unilateralism. Our Nairobi studio looks at how this will play out on the ground in Africa.
Welcome back to a special coverage of U.S. President-elect Joe Biden's inauguration. And now, let's see how this impacts the African continent. Will Biden reverse Trump administration's withdrawal of U.S. troops from Somalia? We have CGTN's Abdulaziz Bilo live in Mogadishu for more on that. And from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, our correspondent Girum Chala brings us perspectives from the African Union on Biden's inauguration. Now, Joe Biden's campaign platform pledged the U.S. would renew a mutually respectful engagement towards Africa with a bold strategy. The African Union took great exception to President Donald Trump's attitude to African nations, especially after he referred to some African states in upsetting terms in January 2018. Biden's administration is expected to engage and support the AU member states in the fight against the coronavirus pandemic, war on terror, promotion of democracy and human rights. CGTN's Girum Chala joins us from Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa, which is also the home of the African Union. Girum, the continent's relationship with the U.S. under the Trump administration has not really been a rosy one. What's the sentiment you are getting from the AU regarding the new Biden administration and how they expect to engage with it?
Penina, as you have mentioned, over the last 4 years of President Trump's administration, the relationship between the African Union and the U.S. was rather shaky. And some even believe that that relationship went a bit backwards. Now that a new president is coming to office, Joe Biden, the African Union wish for that to be changed, both in terms of change of heart and change of policy. One of the areas, the most important areas, President Trump has been blamed here in the continent, and here even at the African Union headquarters, is for lack of clear policy towards Africa. Nothing at all, as some would like to even refer to it. And now Joe Biden is expected to change that, come out clear with what he wants to do with the African continent. And Africa needs a partner that can be reliable, more like what China is doing with the continent. So in the next few weeks and months, we should be able to see those things, if they are going to be a reality or not. But here in the African continent, and more particularly at the AU headquarters, excitement is really in order.
Garoon, Biden is coming in at a time Africa is experiencing significant changes and challenges. What is the AU prioritizing in its agenda as it seeks a better relationship with the United States?
Well, as you know, COVID-19 has been bringing fear to perhaps all economies across the world. And for the African Union, it's a worrying factor. The post-corona period for African economies is something that the African Union and member states themselves are contemplating what is going to the future hold for us. And partners come in this regard very highly, as they can support the continent to come out of the woods. So the African Union wants to prioritize partnership with the United States, for instance, in the area of development, creating more jobs. African economies are shrinking, let alone because of the already existing COVID-19 problems, but also because of their, years of problems. So developmental activities, especially infrastructure development, is one of the priorities. And also on the health sector, the United States is expected to partner up with the African Union. Again, China is also assisting the African continent with building of the Africa CDC headquarters and supplying many consignments. The U.S. is expected to practically involve in this matter as well. On the other hand, and the most important one, is the peace and security sector. Peace and security in the continent is still a factor that the African Union and its member states are not really addressing. So the U.S. support in this regard is highly expected, and Joe Biden, the incoming new president, is hoped to address these important issues in all sectors, so that the African Union can continue becoming its ally and partner in the coming 4 years of his presidency.
All right, Garoon, we appreciate that. Thank you very much for joining us, Garoon Chala, live in Addis Ababa. Now, Donald Trump leaves office having completed the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Somalia. Around 700 U.S. troops had been helping Somalia battle al-Shabaab militants and prepare Somali forces to take over security operations once regional forces depart. The U.S. troop withdrawal was ordered by President Trump at the beginning of December last year. There have been fears that their exit could leave Somalia vulnerable to a resurgence of al-Shabaab and Islamic State militants. The U.S. says it will continue to conduct counter-terrorism operations outside of Somalia. CGTN correspondent Abdulaziz Bilo has been covering the process since it started, and he joins us live now from Mogadishu in Somalia. Abdul, what's the latest on the U.S. troops withdrawal from Somalia, and how has the Somali government been reacting to that withdrawal?
Well, Penina, the process of redeploying U.S. troops out of Somalia and into neighboring Kenya and Djibouti completed on the 15th of January. That was the part of the executive order that was issued by the outgoing U.S. President Donald Trump. And after the process was completed, Somali authorities are of the view that so it was not yet right for the U.S. forces to pull out at this moment out of Somalia. So the process has been completed. Almost 700 U.S. personnel who were stationed in Somalia have moved out and redeployed to neighboring Kenya and Djibouti. But the Somali president in November and October and December, when there were concerns that U.S. wanted to pull out its troops, raised his objection, saying that Somalia was not yet ready to go it alone because the U.S. is Somalia's #1 ally in the war against terror, and its absence will deal a huge blow to the fight against Al-Shabaab and ISIL, especially in northern Somalia. The US has been assisting the Somali security forces all over the years and assisting them fighting Al-Shabaab, and this has in turn turned the tide against the Africa's dreaded militant group. Before the US forces redeployed its troops to Somalia, Al-Shabaab virtually controlled most parts of the country, and after they came, they actually turned the tide using drone strikes and American troops on the ground assisting Somali forces. So definitely authorities are of the view that Joe Biden will change the US policy and bring back American soldiers, because Somali forces are rebuilding and they're not yet ready to go it alone.
All right, Abdul, thank you for that. Abdulaziz Bilu, live in Somalia. All right, so those are live pictures now coming to you from Washington, D.C., the inauguration of Joe Biden as the 46th president of the United States. And analysts believe that the U.S. under Trump put Africa at arm's length. Expectation is therefore high that not only diplomacy, but also trade and investment will thrive under Joe Biden. We have with us Professor Anthony Keeler, Professor of Strategy and Development at the Center for International Advanced and Professional Studies, CIAPS. He joins us live from Lagos. Professor Keeler, in what ways do you see U.S.-Africa relations changing under Biden, or should we expect the same America First approach that we've seen under Trump?
No, I do not think so. I think there's going to be quite a shift for three main reasons. Number one is personal. Joe Biden is very cosmopolitan, and he really believes in multinationalism. So chances are he will open more to Africa. The other reason is political. He has an interesting balance to strike. For the first time in the history of America, the votes of African Americans have actually been very consequential in the election of Joe Biden. He says it more than me when he took time to acknowledge this, the black vote. And I think for the first time in the history of America, the diaspora will count a lot more. So these things will affect him. He will, of course, need to juxtapose that with the dissenting voices he will find in Congress and in parts of America. But definitely, my prediction and expectation is that Biden is going to be very much more open, more fluid towards Africa, like to the rest of the world.
All right, thank you. We have been speaking to Professor Anthony Keeler, Professor of Strategy and Development at the Center for International Advanced and Professional Studies in Lagos. Back to you, Jiayang.
All right, thank you so much, Panina, for that. Now you're watching CGTN's live coverage of the inauguration of the 46th President of the United States. Now, under Donald Trump, U.S. policy was hostile towards China and Iran and warm with Israel. So now the region is anticipating how Biden intends to engage with Asia. Now, for more on this, let's go to our correspondent Stephanie Freed, who's in Tel Aviv, live for us. Now, Stephanie, I'd like to talk to you about expectations regarding Biden's Middle East policy. Now, we know that Biden wants to reverse many of Trump's policies, but it does look like Israel could see some level of continuity. So earlier, we learned that Biden will not be reversing Trump's move to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital and will keep the U.S. embassy there. So how's this being perceived in Israel?
Certainly the Israeli government is very pleased with the idea of the U.S. embassy staying where it was moved under the Trump administration, which was a departure from any other administration's policies in terms of recognizing Jerusalem or saying that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. Israelis in general and the Israeli government have been overwhelmingly very pleased with the Trump administration. And moves that were made again that broke with previous administrations, recognizing Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, declaring a deal of the century peace deal with Palestinians that was not considered by the Palestinians a peace deal at all, and left out the Palestinians in terms of the negotiations. In terms of the entire Middle East, now it's about restoring credibility. There's been a lot of confusion under the Trump administration, mixed messages coming from the White House. We heard the correspondent talking in Somalia about withdrawals from that area, withdrawals also from the Middle East. Joe Biden, that administration, certainly they have much to tend to domestically, but as far as the Middle East, the major moves that I'm hearing from some of the analysts here would be to get diplomacy moving, get Palestinian-Israeli negotiations back on track again, not with high hopes, because many previous administrations have tried to get those talks that have been long silent going without success. As well, there will be this attempt to restore credibility and try to stop advances on the part of Russia and Turkey within the region. Last, which isn't something that Israel would be happy about, would be restarting the Iran nuclear deal that the Trump administration dropped out of.
All right, thank you so much. Stephanie Freed live for us in Tel Aviv, and you are watching live pictures of the build-up to the inauguration of Joe Biden in Washington. Now, Stephanie there mentioned about the Iran nuclear deal. Now, we want to talk about this with Tehran-based political analyst Mustafa Hosheshem. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, Iran's already said that it will not renegotiate the deal. How do you see things playing out then with Biden in office? Mr. Hosheshem?
Hello, and thanks for having me. Well, all throughout the past 2 decades, the United States and Iran, whenever they've had some kind of agreement or talks, the Iranian officials have been looking for a conflict resolution approach. But the United States has been looking for containing Iran. This specific strategy of containment that works through sanctions and military threat in order to raise the costs for Iranian decision makers to give concessions through talks came into practice by Obama when Biden was a vice president. And even Donald Trump played the same strategy. Now, of course, the difference is that he played it very naively in an inexperienced way. So he has undermined this strategy and the pillars of this strategy that are the sanctions and the military threat. So Biden has come to office after his manifesto on CNN said that he is looking for the same things that Donald Trump and Obama wanted. He wants to contain Iran's power in the region, its missile industry, its nuclear industries, and anything else through the same strategy. But the difference is that now he has this strategy working in a weak way because the sanctions maximum efficiency period ended in May, and the U.S. threats have been overblown. Iran, struck the U.S. airbase in Ain al-Assad. It shut down the Global Hawk, and there was no response. Therefore, as far as we know, the future goes like this. For the time being, unfortunately, Biden says that he wants to get back to the talks and to the JCPOA. But in action, in practice, deep down, he's looking for the same containment strategy. Now, of course, he doesn't have
I'm very
a powerful
sorry to have to interrupt you there. I'd love to talk to you further about this, but we are running a little short on time. So that's political commentator Mustafa Hosheshem live for us. That's the voice that you were hearing of him. And now we also want to bring in our reporter, Cui Huao, who's live for us in Beijing. And we have the live pictures going there earlier. Huao, now a new administration coming into power. What's China saying about it? What are expectations?
Hello there, Zhao Yan. At today's press briefing, the Foreign Ministry spokesperson Hua Chunying called on the Biden administration to work with China under the spirit of mutual respect and benefit, and together move bilateral ties back on track. Now, she blamed the U.S. government for the damage done to the bilateral ties over the past 4 years, accusing the Trump administration of viewing China as its biggest competitor and enemy, as well as interfering in China's domestic affairs, spreading rumors, and defaming China. Now, she says this is not in the interest of both people and was certainly not conducive to a healthy and stable bilateral relationship. We know the year 2020 saw a drastic deterioration in bilateral relations, from the fight over the pandemic, the name-calling, and the shutting down each other's consulates, to the escalating tech battles and issues that China considers red lines, such as Taiwan, Hong Kong, Xinjiang, and the South China Sea. So most analysts agree that these tensions have pushed China-U.S. ties to a historical low. But that being said, 2020 is not without a silver lining. For instance, the latest trade figures show both China's exports and imports with the U.S. actually picked up last year. That is in part due to the pandemic, which stalled U.S. manufacturing, but also part of China's commitment to the Phase 1 trade deal. That was signed last January, and since then China has been buying more American products. So from China's perspective, China-U.S. relationships are at a crossroads right now. Where they head will largely hinge upon what approach that the Biden administration will take on Beijing. Back to you.
And what kind of expectations for change are we hoping for here?
Right. Well, certainly there's expectations are pretty high on change. One of the main guys in Biden's cabinet will be Kurt Campbell, a career diplomat who used to work under the Obama administration. He's been tapped by Joe Biden to be his senior official for Asia policy, and that includes dealing with China. Now, remember, Campbell is considered an architect of Obama's pivot to Asia strategy, which is essentially about shifting Washington's resources to its geopolitical and security interests to Asia. But that strategy was scrapped by Trump and was replaced by his Indo-Pacific strategy. This one focused on building partnerships with regional countries to contain China's growing power. Now, having Campbell on his Biden's team is a sign that Biden's foreign policy will focus on Asia again over the next 4 years, but with a potentially different approach. Campbell recently said he believes the U.S. should be building a consensus with its allies and partners and focus on small steps in its competition with China. And those steps, he says, may include reversing the tit-for-tat expulsion of journalists, easing visa restrictions, and restoring closed consulates. He also says clear communication is key to avoid surprises on issues that have been mishandled in recent years. Now, he thinks the relationship should be handled under the guiding principles of predictability, steadiness, and clarity. So we can see that this is a clear distinction from Trump's approach, which is considered more inconsistent, unpredictable, and sometimes even reckless. But regardless, from this moment on, it is a new chapter for China-U.S. relations, one of the most complex relations in the world.
Thank you so much. Reporters who are live for us in Beijing. Now let's go back to our studio guest, Einar Tangen. Now, Einar, earlier when we were talking about prospects for China-U.S. ties, and you had mentioned something about possibly under Biden, it's different means to the same end. Just elaborate on that for me.
Well, what I mean by it is, and that was covered in this, Kurt Campbell, who's going to be spearheading this, is very much of the view that China needs to be contained. That was the pivot to Asia. In essence, what you're getting is Obama round two. So many of these are there. But the difference is, this is a very professional group. Kurt Campbell has back channel communications. He knows people on the Chinese side. There can be real communication. That was not true with somebody like Pompeo, where it was just bluster and everything's wrong with China and this type of thing. So in terms of how they're going to do it, it was alluded to. They want to put together a coalition. And it of course included the European allies. They were looking to bring in India as well as Japan and South Korea. And the whole point was trying to create a united front in this effort to, quote, contain China.
Now, so what you're saying is that practical concerns will probably trump ideological concerns here. So, the big news of Trump's administration on China, the trade war with technology as one of the core focus of some of his attacks on China. Now, does Biden coming into office signal the end of that?
He has to. If you go through the list of these technology companies who are really being hit hard, and these are people who work for $100,000 to $600,000, $700,000, $1 million a year. When those jobs are lost, they're gone, and they get lost because they don't have markets to sell in. And Trump has been beating on them. You noticed how much of the technology industry was contributing to Biden's campaign. They're going to be calling in that chit. They didn't just throw money at this because they thought he was going to do the same thing as Trump, and it's needed. You cannot have those jobs go away because those jobs and markets create the dollars for investment into our research and development. Mm-hmm. Without that, you can't stay ahead of the game. Trump was all about, it's the Nancy Hardin effect. That was the lady who tripped up, who wanted to break her opponent's legs.
All right. Well, Einar, listen, thank you so much for your time, and especially at this hour. It's great to hear your views and great to have you with us. And this has been our special live coverage of an unprecedented transition of power in U.S. history. I'm Jiao Yang. Thanks so much for watching. CGTN's Mike Walter and the rest of our team in Washington, D.C. will return in just a minute with the inauguration as it happens. And for now, we'll leave you with scenes from Trump's last moments as President of the United States.
Left it all, as the athletes would say, we've left it all.
A divided United States prepares to swear in a new president after a long and chaotic election.
I will be president for all Americans.
A call for healing, 4 years to the day after an ominous message from Donald Trump.
This American carnage stops right here and stops right now.
But after carnage at the Capitol, Trump's first and only term ends as the first and only president to be impeached twice, charged with inciting a deadly riot. Unprecedented security now surrounds the ceremony to swear in Joseph R. Biden as the 46th president of the United States. And he faces a monumental task: control the pandemic, reunite the country, rebuild the economy, and restore the U.S. reputation at home and around the world.
Live from Washington, this is a CGTN special report.
Hello, and thanks so much for joining us. I'm Mike Walter in Washington, D.C. with special coverage of the U.S. presidential inauguration. The clock is ticking. These are the last minutes of President Donald Trump and Vice President Mike Pence's term. Joe Biden is poised to take the oath of office in just about an hour from right now, along with Kamala Harris, who will be the first woman, first black person, and first South Asian American to hold the office of Vice President. CGTN America is covering this historic day from across Washington, D.C. Nathan King outside the White House, Jim Spellman on the streets of Washington, and Sean Caleb's overlooking the Capitol. And we begin with Sean, just outside the ceremony site. Sean, give us a scene setter. What are we expecting today?
Well, I think it's going to be unlike any kind of inauguration swearing in that we have ever seen here in the United States. If you look behind me, you can see the backdrop looks absolutely gorgeous. The weather here is perfect, a little windy, but comfortable, just enough to know it's still winter here in Washington, D.C. But the National Mall is basically void of people, and that is certainly unlike any other ceremony. That is because Biden is being sworn in along with Kamala Harris in the backdrop of a pandemic that has now claimed more than 400,000 lives in the United States. And one of the first tasks that the Biden camp really wants to push forward is a kind of stimulus package and a better way to roll out the vaccine, a more effective way. It just has not got off to a good start. There are some arrivals that are just beginning now, and the Biden and Harris will be sworn in just about 1 hour. Now, they started the day with a prayer service, and it's interesting and important to note that at that prayer service, outgoing Majority Leader of the Senate, Mitch McConnell, was there. One thing that Biden has indicated he wants to do is reach out across the aisle and find a way to try and cut back on the harsh partisan politics that has really characterized Washington, D.C., especially over the past 4 years. We also know that Paul Ryan, the former House Speaker, will be here today as well, sitting behind Biden as he is sworn in. And Mike, you talked a couple of significant points about the fact that Harris is going to be the first black woman to be vice president, also the first person of South Asian descent. Right now, Mike Pence, the vice president, outgoing vice president of the United States, is arriving. Interestingly enough, we have heard a lot about Donald Trump won't over the past week. He won't concede. He won't congratulate the Biden camp. He won't be here to greet Biden at the White House, and he will not attend the ceremony. But he apparently did leave a letter for Joe Biden in the Oval Office. It'll be interesting to see if we gain any insight into that later on today. But a lot going on here today. Very subdued, though. You talked about the security. It is really overwhelming. I mean, everywhere you go, you see, we all know about the 25,000 National Guard troops that are deployed in the area. There are also Capitol Police, and there are also City Police. And one thing I want to point out, Mike, as I pass on to you, it's interesting that the horrific events that unfolded on January 6th, what many are calling a seditious, treasonous act, we know about that one Capitol police officer, Eugene Goodman, who led the mob away from the Senate chamber, and he's credited with giving authorities enough time to get the senators out of there peacefully and safely. Well, he was the one who escorted Kamala Harris to the Capitol today. Very significant moment, and perhaps a harbinger for things to come, maybe a little more peaceful.
And Sean, it's really interesting to note, as you mentioned, Vice President Mike Pence just arriving. He's sort of become the de facto president in a way, because Trump himself has kind of disappeared from the scene. Of course, he had that exit today. He did not join the incoming president in the trip over to the Capitol, which is kind of a tradition. The last time we saw a president-elect not to do that was Andrew Johnson, so it's been some time. But talk to us about the importance of this bipartisan message. You know, seeing George W. Bush there as well as Barack Obama, this is one of the things we see every 4 years, and it's an important distinction to show this transfer of power.
Well, I think you're exactly right. And if you think back to 4 years ago, remember all the things that outgoing President Trump said about Barack Obama, that he wasn't born in this country, but still Obama had the integrity to ride with Trump in the same car over to the Capitol, attend the swearing in, along with his wife, Michelle, the outgoing First Lady. And the tone was set. You had a clip of that early on when Trump came out and delivered that, what many are calling just a harsh inaugural address, where he said America first. And it wasn't just America first, it was America first, second, third, and heck with anybody else. And no bipartisan. Trump would actually call anybody who voted against him an enemy. So it's certainly going to be, I think, good for politics to see a calmer Biden, someone who has worked across the aisle and has a very extensive background being a senator for such a long time. He's really one of the youngest U.S. senators ever. Now he's going to become, I think, the oldest U.S. president ever. As he's sworn in, about 55 minutes, Mike.
All right, Sean Caleb's for us live as we look at Vice President Mike Pence there early on, greeting some. Let's go to Jim Spellman, because he's covering another aspect of this day. It is a city basically in lockdown, heavy security presence, 25,000 National Guard members out there today. Right, Jim?
Yeah, and listen, even before that really came into the picture, this was always going to be a much different inauguration because of COVID-19. Joe Biden's presidential campaign and his transition have stressed safety from the virus, and we're seeing that here today. So we're here at the north side of the U.S. Capitol, and this is an area where VIPs are coming in. On a normal year, there would be people streaming through here, hundreds of thousands of people to go to the mall and attend it. They're simply not happening this year. The message has been to stay away. Then, of course, 2 weeks ago, we had the riot at the Capitol, and that has brought us these level of security here. U.S. Secret Service are overall in charge of it, but as Sean mentioned, we have City Police, Capitol Police. There's actually some of the Border Patrol back here, and 25,000 or so members of the National Guard. Earlier, I caught up with a member of the Pennsylvania Air National Guard who's traveled to Washington to be part of the security detail. Listen.
There are so many varieties of missions, okay? From traffic control points where we're at here, this is TCP is what we call it, to providing communications, to providing logistics support. Our guardsmen bring a certain level of diverse skill sets that the D.C. National Guard has utilized and plugged us in.
We understand that authorities are not tracking any specific threats to the events today, but they've been monitoring a lot of what they call online chatter, people communicating about potentially taking various actions. And they've actually been looking at those 25,000 National Guardsmen, running background checks, and about a dozen or so have been removed from serving today. 2 for sending extremist right-wing messaging on social media or back and forth in text message. The other 10 or so, we're not sure, but they're looking everywhere from threats, hoping to make today a safe day, Mike.
And Jim, just to kind of illustrate what the city looks like, last night I went out for a short walk. It was a ghost town. The only person I saw out there, happenstance, you. Give me your sense of what it's been like the last couple of days, because it's really amazing seeing all these trucks blocking roads, National Guardsmen everywhere. And of course, 4 years ago you were out there on the parade route. Just give me a sense of how different it feels right now.
I mean, I grew up in Washington, and it's a sort of a rite of passage to come to an inauguration. Just as a kid, I came to inaugurations for both parties. You know, it doesn't matter often. People just want to be part of history. And there's just a sense that you can't do that this year. But I think people here in the city are exhausted. I mean, from the Black Lives Matter protests, then counter protests, COVID-19, and then, of course, what happened here 2 weeks ago at the U.S. Capitol. The city is exhausted. I think people are going along with this and are more than happy to stay home and watch from home. There's a sense that a different kind of history is being made today. It look and feel different than it has in the past. People still want to be part of it. That's just going to mean something different this year, Mike.
Well, Jim Spellman live for us. Let's check in with CGTN White House correspondent Nathan King. He's joining us now. Nathan, the last day for Donald Trump. It's been an amazing 4 years. It seems like you've covered many, many tweets. It must kind of feel different today for you.
It does, because we started looking at another Twitter feed, Joe Biden's, and I can tell you it's very, very weird looking at that, considering we've had no Twitter feed for the past couple of weeks because, of course, Donald Trump has been suspended. But yeah, here's the White House behind me, and it's a new day in America, as we know. And at dawn, essentially, the 45th president of the United States, Donald Trump, lifted off in Marine One, giving a thumbs up. You could tell he was looking at the White House one last time, maybe all those memories and maybe some regrets that he's not going to be there for another 4 years. And then to Andrews Air Force Base, where a very cold crowd of probably about 200 or 300 supporters, many of them from his family and other close aides, listened to him give what were his final words as president. And as we saw in that video message the evening before, it's probably some of the most presidential lines he has delivered, at least in the last few months. But he still won't actually say that he lost the election, and he still won't say the words Joe Biden and president, but he is leaving. It is quieter, of course, than it was on January the 6th, and you could see a concession speech behind the rhetoric. Let's take a listen.
I wish the new administration great luck and great success. I think they'll have great success. They have the foundation to do something really spectacular. And again, we put it in a position like it's never been before, despite the worst plague to hit since, I guess you'd say 1917, over 100 years ago. And despite that, the things that we've done have been just incredible, and I couldn't have done it without you. So just a goodbye. We love you. We will be back in some form.
We will be back in some form. That raised a lot of eyebrows among the press corps. What sort of form? Remember, he could, if convicted in the Senate and another vote is held, or potentially through the Congress, be banned from ever holding office. So in that some form suggests he has some sort of ideas about what his political future will be. Remember, most presidents stay silent when their successor takes over. Barack Obama, of course, broke that during the election campaign to come out heavily for Joe Biden. We'll wait and see. Meanwhile, by the way, this new Twitter account of Joe Biden is a little bit more uplifting. It would be on Inauguration Day. As you know, his tweets say it's a new day in America. Today, we begin anew. He thanks his wife, Jill. And as you can tell from the music, and Kamala Harris, the new Vice President-to-be stand there with the new second gentleman. It's a day for celebration here for Biden and Harris, and goodbye to Trump.
And talk to us about this amazing fall that we've seen of Donald Trump in just the last couple of weeks. The fact that Mitch McConnell the other day came out with this kind of fiery speech. McConnell was not there for his send-off today. McCarthy was not there for his send-off today. Mike Pence was not there. Give us a sense of just what we've seen over the last couple of weeks, because it's been very dramatic.
I think you're right, Max. Even John Kelly and people who'd worked directly as his, chief of staff and others were not there. I mean, are you kidding? Some of them said to the press when they were invited. In fact, it was hard for Donald Trump to get that many people. They were handing out invites saying, bring 5 of your friends, sort of thing. They knew it was going to be a problem. And look, Trump has always been a divisive president, but he is leaving office essentially with the lowest approval rating of any president in history, in the 30%. And the move from the controversy to the outright inciting of the insurrection in the Capitol really meant this tenuous relationship he always had with the Republican Party was all but broken, especially with the leadership. But, as you heard, from many speeches and many objections to his impeachment and the election results, he still commands respect of the base. 74 million voters, the most ever for a sitting president. It's just that Joe Biden got a lot more.
That's right. Kamala Harris there waving to the crowd. Nathan King live for us. Thanks so much. We'll be checking in with Nathan throughout. Joe Biden campaigned on a promise of a more aggressive response to the coronavirus. The U.S. has recorded more than 24 million cases, with deaths passing 400,000. His first plan is to get more people vaccinated for free. He set a goal for 100 million shots in his first 100 days in office. Biden seeks to create more venues for inoculations. That includes community centers and mobile clinics to reach underserved communities. He'll also tap the Defense Production Act to ramp up the supply of vaccines and release nearly every available dose. Immediately, Biden will sign a series of executive orders. They include a national mask mandate on federal property and re-engagement with the World Health Organization, reversing the controversial pullout by his predecessor. Countries around the world are waiting to see how the new U.S. president moves forward with foreign policy. Many are counting on Joe Biden to pivot away from Donald Trump's America First agenda. One of the very first things Biden plans to do as president is rejoin the Paris Climate Accord. He also plans to undo some of Trump's harshest immigration policies, including the travel ban on some Muslim-majority countries, funding for the border wall, and the Remain in Mexico policy for asylum seekers. Biden also plans to create a path to citizenship for some 11 million undocumented immigrants in the United States. Countries around the world are waiting to see how the new U.S. president moves forward with foreign policy. In Latin America, for instance, President Trump largely focused on immigration and actions against leftist leaderships in Cuba and Venezuela. Stephen Gibbs joining us now from Caracas. Stephen, do we yet know how the Biden administration will approach Venezuela's political crisis?
Well, Mike, we do to a certain extent to one of the key questions about Venezuela, and that is whether the Biden administration will continue to recognize Juan Guaido, the opposition leader here, as president of the country. That's something which President Trump did very forcibly. Now, we have a glimpse of what the Biden administration approach to that will be, because Antony Blinken is the nominee for Secretary of State under Biden.
Just interrupt for just a second, Stephen. Stephen, if I can just interrupt for just a second, because President-elect Joe Biden and First Lady-to-be Jill Biden now making their way through the Capitol, and they soon will enter to probably a robust round of applause, I would suspect, as they make their way down to where he will take his place and wait for the oath of office from Chief Justice John Roberts. Let's listen in.
Ladies and gentlemen, accompanying the President-elect, the Staff Director of the Joint Congressional Committee and Inaugural Ceremonies, Fitzhugh Elder IV, the Acting House Senate Sergeant-at-Arms, Tim Blodgett, and the Acting Senate Sergeant-at-Arms, Jennifer Hemingway. Ladies and gentlemen, the President-elect of the United States, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. and Dr. Jill Biden. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated.
I'd like to invite in Bill Crane. He's a senior communication strategist. He's worked for 2 U.S. senators. He's joining us now from Decatur, Georgia for our special coverage. That walk down the steps that we just witnessed, an amazing sight to see, Bill. I can remember back in the 1980s, 1987, I was a reporter in Columbus, Ohio. I interviewed this senator from Delaware in his 40s, running for president. That's how long he's been running for president. Today, he will be sworn in. Talk to us about the significance of this day.
Well, I wish we were having the celebratory day a president usually gets. I also met Joe Biden during that campaign in 1988 at the Democratic National Convention, and he has been aspiring to this for a long time, as well as serving for 8 years as vice president. But I think the most significant thing about this day is that America gets to turn a page, start a new chapter, and hopefully a more positive note in 2021 as we tend to we start to further rein back the pandemic. And we move into an administration that we can't determine in advance all the things they will or won't do, but at least at the outset is speaking with a more conciliatory tone to the entirety of the American people, not just one party, not just one base, in hopes of actually healing our nation again without that being forced by an act of war or something on the level of 9/11 to reunify the American people.
And Bill, I'm sure you remember when Richard Nixon left the White House and Gerald Ford had his comments about the long national nightmare being over. Do you think Biden's going to allude to the last 4 years or even the significance of what happened just a couple of weeks ago there at the Capitol?
I'm sure there will be references to the assault on the Capitol as well as the Trump administration. My hope would be that rather than do what Donald Trump did 4 years ago and start talking about a very dark past 4 years or 8 under Barack Obama, that we get more of Joe Biden's vision for the future. And again, some words reaching across the aisle and reaching out to some of Mr. Trump's base that I'm your president too. I think it's important today. He's got a State of the Union in a few weeks that he sets a tone of being the president for the whole nation, speaking for himself as well as his vice president, Kamala Harris.
There are some awkward aspects to this event. Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri said he was going to be there today. Obviously, he was one of the people that gave speeches and kind of denied that Biden had won this race. How do you bring these sides together? I mean, there's been so much talk about bipartisanship, but we've seen kind of this guerrilla warfare from both sides, actually, for some time now. How do you stop that?
It starts with common decency, treating people civilly and treating people as you want to be treated. I was there covering the first and second administrations of George W. Bush in those inaugurations. In that first instance, Vice President Al Gore in 2000 presided over the congressional certification of an electoral college vote that did not put him in the White House and struck down the objections of some Congress members from Florida who wanted to object to a state that Al Gore only lost by 536 votes, which delivered a 5-vote electoral majority for George Bush. It's a chilly morning at the White House that day for the breakfast brunch, typically hosted by the outgoing administration, which Vice President Pence and his wife hosted today. But Al Gore was on the stage looking on at his successor about 10 feet away, as the outgoing president is from the incoming president, something Donald Trump isn't doing today. And the last time that happened, Andrew Johnson had been impeached in 1865 or so, or during the end of his administration, and he did not attend the inauguration of Ulysses S. Grant.
Bill Crane giving us some analysis during this important day. Thank you so much. We'll be checking in with you periodically. Right now, though, we'd like to go back to Stephen Gibbs in Caracas. Stephen, I apologize for interrupting you, but of course that was a moment we had to capture. Give us your sense again of how the foreign policy may shift under a Biden administration.
Yes, well, the key question here in Venezuela, where I'm speaking to you from, is how much Biden might reverse some of Trump's policies, particularly this unusual situation we have here where the US and various other countries recognize the opposition leader, Juan Guaido, here as the legitimate president. So the question on many people's lips is, will that be reversed by Biden? The answer is no, and the reason we know that pretty certainly is that Antony Blinken, who's the Biden nominee for Secretary of State, was asked precisely that during his Senate nomination hearings in Washington yesterday, and this is what he had to say.
Recognizing Mr. Guaido, recognizing the National Assembly as the only democratically elected institution in Venezuela, seeking to increase pressure on the regime led by a brutal dictator in Maduro, as well as to try to work with some of our allies and partners. The hard part is that for all of those efforts, which I support, we obviously have not gotten the results.
Antony Blinken there, the Biden nominee for Secretary of State, making it very clear in his nomination hearings in the US Senate that the US under Biden will continue to recognize Juan Guaido, the opposition leader, as president here in Venezuela.
Missouri Senator Roy Blunt now addressing the crowd after Amy Klobuchar's remarks, the Minnesota senator. What about some of the other countries in the region? Any major policy shifts in the cards there?
Congressional Committee on the Inauguration as we officially began the 59th.
I think, Mike, we're definitely going to see a change of tone. Just to look at two countries where Biden, we think, will shift things a bit. Cuba, under Trump, he reversed a lot of the Obama openings towards Cuba. He clamped down on remissions towards the island. He sanctioned many military entities on Cuba. We see some of that being reversed under Biden, partly because a lot of people in the Biden foreign ministry team really are people who were actively working to open up relations towards Cuba. Another key country, really a key area to look at under Biden for a change is Brazil. Bolsonaro, the Brazilian right-wing president, very close to Trump, a real ally there. But Biden has already made it pretty clear he's going to take a different tack, particularly on the issue of the Amazon. There has been quite heavy deforestation of the Amazon in recent years, and Biden has said that there will be economic consequences for Brazil if that continues. Back to you.
Stephen Gibbs in Caracas giving a sense of what might happen in the region with the new president in place at the White House. It was certainly a roller coaster 4 years for U.S.-China relations during the Trump administration. But will a change in administration bring some stability? Chung Lee joining us now. He's the director for the John L. Thornton China Center at the Brookings Institution. Always a pleasure chatting with you. Give me a sense of what you think we can see. I mean, it was a really kind of full court press for 4 years with the Trump administration. Is that likely to change overnight?
Well, it will change, but it will not change overnight. And certainly that the previous administration that took a policy basically wanted to change the Chinese government, to change the regime. And also that there's a lot of policies really do not reflect American values, including McCarthyism, racism against the Chinese or Chinese Americans. And also, they pushed too hard on the Taiwan issue. So China reacted very, very aggressively. So I think that the U.S.-China relation not only deteriorated to the degree that beyond anyone's imagination or expectation, but also reached a point that there's a real danger for military conflict. This is, if it would happen, it will escalate very, very quickly. This is the war. No one can win. And like Dr. Kissinger said, that it's a devastating situation. So I think in that regard, the new administration will change. And but on the other hand, I think that the world has changed. China has changed. U.S. has changed. I think it's a new environment. There's a legitimate concern and worries from the U.S. perspective. So I think that there will be an important point of adjustment. And I think that China also needs to some adjustment as well. But I think the near future, I think there's areas for cooperation, not only just the economic financial stability in the world, the United States certainly in a difficult situation, but most urgently, it will be on the COVID-19 and also climate change. I think these are international public good will be very, very important to show goodwill, to see the need for cooperation, then we'll spread to some other areas.
Let me ask you about relationships and how they might matter, and also an understanding of China, because when you look at Joe Biden, he was a senator for many, many years, over 3 decades. He was one of the first to go with a congressional delegation to China. I think it was in '79. He made another trip as the head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And then, of course, he made a couple of trips as well as the U.S. Vice President. He's had meetings with Xi Jinping, of course, in 2012 when he was vice president, when he came here. He met with him, and also not just here in Washington, but also in Los Angeles. Talk to us about those relationships and understanding of China vis-a-vis the Trump administration and their approach.
Well, yeah, President Biden visited China 4 times. He met with Xi Jinping altogether 11 times. During the months you just mentioned, that is 18 months between 2012 and 2013, there's incident in China, Bolshevik crisis and other crises. He actually spent 25 hours together with Xi Jinping on one-on-one base. So again, compare with his predecessor, Donald Trump, and also even compare with George W. Bush. So he is well informed about China, as you mentioned, about the early years as a congressman, as a senator, and etc. So he does not need his advisors to tell him what China, how to deal with China. He is well experienced. And also very important that during the campaign, in the particular final months, and also after he got elected, he said that Donald Trump's China policy is a failure, which means that he will significantly change that policy. And also he repeatedly said it was Russia, not China, that interfered in the U.S. election. And certainly he and his team see China and Russia very differently. He also emphasized China is a competitor, not an enemy, at least not enemy yet. So it's very, very important to have this kind of background, this kind of experience. I think that this will make a huge difference. But does not mean that all the problem will be resolved, because he deals with the political environment in the United States, especially on the Capitol Hill, is still very, very harsh on China. With some their own consideration, there's some space on solid or evidence or their particular interests, but ultimately it's based on the changing geopolitical landscape. China become much stronger over the years, and the United States dealing with a series of challenges. I don't need to list all these challenges: coronavirus, economy, racial tensions, and also that because of Donald Trump, American reputation in the world also declined. So again, these are the challenges. But along with in areas like COVID-19, climate change, economic recovery, we need China's cooperation. Now on the Capitol Hill, there's a very strong bipartisanship, very firm on China. But in the local level, it's a different picture. Governors and mayors still want to do business with China. American business community still look at China as a huge market. So how to reconcile this kind of tension in the Capitol Hill, in the Beltway, and also the heartland of the United States? These are things that for him and for his administration, they need to take advantage about the American discourse about foreign policy, but at the same time, on the one hand, should firm to advance American interests, but at the same time, have a kind of a policy not undermine American strengths, but rather to strengthen American strengths, but at the same time find a way to work with China or to deal with China rather than to take a risk about the war scenario.
One of the many things he's going to have to tackle once he makes it to the White House later today. Chung Lee, always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for your analysis. Let's listen in the invocation occurring right now as we watch some of the activities leading up to Biden's speech.
Pope Francis has reminded us how important it is to dream together. By ourselves, he wrote, we risk seeing mirages, things that are not there. Dreams, on the other hand, are built together. Be with us, holy mystery of love, as we dream together. Help us under our new president to reconcile the people of our land, restore our dream and invest it with peace and justice and the joy that is the overflow of love. To the glory of your name, forever, amen.
We just heard there some of the comments. Dreams are built together. This unity theme, a very big part of today's events. There you see the president-elect greeting him. Let's bring in Sean Caleb so he can give us a preview of what we expect to hear today. Sean?
Well, Mike, in about 30 minutes, President-elect Joe Biden will become the 46th president of the United States. And I think that what you're going to hear a lot of discussion about is just going to be unity. There's no question that the country is polarized right now. We saw that play out in horrific fashion 2 weeks ago during the insurrection movement, if you will, when so many Trump supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol. And it's not just unity here in the United States. Of course, we're going to focus on that to a large degree, just considering the pandemic, the way the vaccine has been rolled out, 400,000 people dead, the economy in turmoil right now, high unemployment. But you also have to look internationally as well. Trump drove a wedge between the United States and its longtime NATO allies. That's something certainly that the Biden camp is going to have to address very quickly. Also, I think people are waiting to see, as we heard from Chun Li just a short while ago, will the Biden administration come out and openly support the One China policy? I mean, there's so much that he has to talk about here today. And you also mentioned the number of measures. I think there's some 17 measures that he hopes to push through today. Perhaps the top of the list, of course, a COVID stimulus plan and a way to get the vaccine out better. And we saw last night at the Lincoln Memorial, very somber ceremony with 200,000 flags in the ground, 400,000 lights, but also joining the Paris Climate Accord again. That is something that is going to be a cornerstone of this administration, and that is going to be welcomed certainly by international friends as well. The United States is really the only nation right now that is not a member of that. Of course, backing out of it, Donald Trump has called climate change a hoax, so I think we're going to hear a bit about that. But really, I think it's going to stress we have to find a way as a nation to come together. And that's what Biden is going to talk about. He spent so much time on Capitol Hill as a U.S. Senator, and he had a reputation for being able to reach across the aisle. He's going to have to summon all of his experience during his time here in Washington as Senator and Vice President if he's going to move forward. But it certainly is hopeful that the fact that outgoing Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell joined him today for the prayer service when Biden left the Blair House across the street from the White House early today. And we also saw the presidents, the former presidents, including George W. Bush, sitting behind Biden during the ceremony today. And like one final note, I think I was totally prepared for the National Mall to be completely vacant, except for the National Guard troops that we see out there now. But you really get a sense for how punishing this pandemic is when you see how separated people are on the stage where Joe Biden is right now. Well, here's somebody that all international folks know, Lady Gaga. I'll let you take it from here, Mike.
Right. We are listening to Lady Gaga. Let's dip into this for a little bit.
Whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and
Lady Gaga with a stirring rendition. As we've said before, a small crowd because of COVID-19. You see the National Guard there as well. Definitely a different look than what we've seen in years past. Let's bring in Bill Crane again. Let's talk a little bit about that, the musical entertainers we're hearing today. Lady Gaga, Garth Brooks, John Legend, Jennifer Lopez. Of course, Trump said to be smarting about all of this as well. But it's kind of interesting, the selections of the musical entertainment and what that means as well.
Well, I believe President Trump, if he had Twitter today, would be tweeting about his crowd being so much larger than Joe Biden, ignoring the pandemic. But it's an important day. Words matter. So does the audience. But thankfully, we have the internet, we have television, so we may have a record global audience tuning in. But the length of an inaugural address isn't always what's most important about it. George Washington's second inauguration was only 135 words, and the longest inaugural address we had by William Henry Harrison in 1841 went on for an hour and 45 minutes without that president wearing a top coat or hat during a blizzard, and he got pneumonia and died a month later.
So short is probably better. I will say I was out today, though. The weather is cold, as it always is this time of year, but not as bad as in years past. He's going to acknowledge what he calls a dark winter. He basically did that last night with this rather stirring ceremony acknowledging 400,000 deaths. Talk to us about how that's going to weave its way into this theme today.
I believe he's going to look back as the dark winter, more referring to the pandemic and the 400,000 Americans that we've lost, a little bit less about the presidency of Donald Trump. At least that's what I hope he's going to do, looking at last night's ceremony on the Mall and those candles that were lit along the reflecting pond between the Washington Monument and the Lincoln Memorial. I think Joe Biden's struggle will be to move fast enough for progressives and not too fast so that the Republicans who would like to follow him get left behind, or there's more insurrection on that side of the aisle and attempt to block his agenda going forward, because he only has a 4-vote majority in the House and a tie, with Kamala Harris breaking the tie vote in the Senate as presiding officer.
All right, we're going to interrupt right now because in just a moment, Kamala Harris, the vice president-elect, will take her oath of office.
After me. I, Kamala Davy Harris, do solemnly swear.
I, Kamala Davy Harris, do solemnly swear.
That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same.
That I take this obligation freely.
That I take this obligation freely.
Without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion.
Without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion.
That I will well and faithfully discharge.
That I will well and faithfully discharge.
The duties of the office on which I am about to enter.
The duties of the office upon which I am about to enter.
So help me God.
So help me God.
All right.
Ladies and gentlemen,
extraordinary moment in American history. Let's bring in Nathan King. The significance of a woman taking the oath of office, becoming the first woman vice president, first woman of color to hold this office, and sworn in by an associate justice, also significant as well, right, Nathan?
Yeah, absolutely. Sonia Sotomayor, of course, the Supreme Court justice appointed under the Barack Obama term. Obviously, she was historic too, but this is a historic moment. Kamala Harris just resigned her seat as Senator for California. She was a contender for the presidency and even jabbed with her boss, now Joe Biden, on the debate stage very early on in that primary process. Now the first woman vice president, the first black woman and the first South Asian. Of course, she had a father from Jamaica, a mother from India, both countries. And this country, of course, celebrating that historical milestone right now. And it's pretty emotional, too, because we're going to have a second gentleman in terms of her husband. Doug, there you can see the elation on her face and also the sense of history as she was reciting the oath. And there was a nice little moment at the end there, I'm sure everyone caught it, as she turned around and Joe Biden, soon to be president himself, gave her a thumbs up, and then they did a sort of social distance gloved fist bump. And that's probably about as close as they're going to get today because of the COVID restrictions. But you could see and feel the emotion even behind Joe Biden's mask there, couldn't you?
All right, Nathan, thanks so much. Let's listen in. Jennifer Lopez now singing.
As I went walking down that ribbon of highway, I saw above me that endless skyway. I saw below me that golden valley. This land was made for you and me. Oh, from sea to shining sea. Una nación bajo Dios, indivisible, con libertad y justicia para todos. Let's get was made for you and me.
As a performer, I suspect most would not want to follow Lady Gaga, who put on quite a stirring presentation, but Jennifer Lopez up to the challenge with her own rendition there. Let's check in with Sean Caleb's. Sean, I can't help but feel the difference this year versus 2009, just a tsunami of people there. Barack Obama becoming the first black president. You have the first black vice president, and yet denied. People can't be there. Women as well, 4 years ago, wanted to see a woman up there at the dais with Hillary Clinton. They didn't see that. Talk to us about kind of that aspect of today.
Well, I think you're exactly right, too. And let's think back where Kamala Harris went to undergrad school here at Howard University, traditionally historic black college and university in the United States, and really gained her foundation and drive. And she talked repeatedly about the fact that, she sat in class with black professors and really gained a sense of professional fulfillment as she moved forward. And that really kind of characterized her early beginning. And
the oath of office is about to begin, Sean, so I'm going to have to dip in here. Let's listen in.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Joseph Robinette Biden, Jr., do solemnly swear.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden, Jr., do solemnly swear.
That I will faithfully execute.
That I will faithfully execute.
The office of President of the United States.
Office of President of the United States.
And will, to the best of my ability.
Will, to the best of my ability.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
preserve, protect, and defend
the Constitution of the United States.
the Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated.
All right, we're awaiting the next phase in the inauguration. You just saw something really, truly remarkable. I mean, I've watched quite a few of these. You saw Chief Justice John Roberts swear in the new president of the United States, but social distancing in place there. I don't know if you noticed it as well. After the speech after the swearing in was done, you saw President Biden hugging his family members, his daughter Ashley there, his son Hunter Biden, who was, of course, a figure in news stories leading up to the election. And then you saw somebody move over to the podium and disinfect it, once again illustrating the time that we are in right now. Senator Amy Klobuchar is speaking right now. Let's listen.
We have all been waiting for. It is now my great privilege and high honor to be the first person to officially introduce the 46th President of the United States, Joseph R. Biden, Jr.
Chief Justice Roberts, Vice President Harris, Speaker Pelosi, Leader Schumer, Leader McConnell, Vice President Pence, and my distinguished guests, my fellow Americans. This is America's day. This is democracy's day, a day of history and hope, of renewal and resolve. Through a crucible for the ages, America has been tested anew, and America has risen to the challenge. Today, we celebrate the triumph not of a candidate, but of a cause, the cause of democracy. The people, the will of the people has been heard, and the will of the people has been heeded. We've learned again that democracy is precious. Democracy is fragile. And at this hour, my friends, democracy has prevailed. So now, on this hallowed ground where just a few days ago, violence sought to shake the Capitol's very foundation, we come together as one nation, under God, indivisible, to carry out the peaceful transfer of power as we have for more than 2 centuries. As we look ahead in our uniquely American way, restless, bold, optimistic, and set our sights on the nation we know we can be and we must be. I thank my predecessors of both parties for their presence here today. I thank them from the bottom of my heart. And I know the resilience of our Constitution and the strength of our nation, as does President Carter, who I spoke with last night, who cannot be with us today, but whom we salute for his lifetime in service. I've just taken the sacred oath each of those patriots have taken, the oath first sworn by George Washington. But the American story depends not on any one of us, not on some of us, but on all of us, on we the people who seek a more perfect union. This is a great nation. We are good people. And over the centuries, through storm and strife, in peace and in war, we've come so far, but we still have far to go. We'll press forward with speed and urgency, for we have much to do in this winter of peril and significant possibilities. Much to repair, much to restore, much to heal, much to build, and much to gain. Few people in our nation's history have been more challenged or found a time more challenging or difficult than the time we're in now. Once-in-a-century virus that silently stalks the country. It's taken as many lives in 1 year as America lost in all of World War II. Millions of jobs have been lost. Hundreds of thousands of businesses closed. A cry for racial justice, some 400 years in the making, moves us. The dream of justice for all will be deferred no longer. A cry for survival comes from the planet itself, a cry that can't be any more desperate or any more clear. And now, a rise of political extremism, white supremacy, domestic terrorism, that we must confront and we will defeat. To overcome these challenges, to restore the soul and secure the future of America, requires so much more than words. It requires the most elusive of all things in a democracy: unity. Unity. In another January, on New Year's Day in 1863, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. When he put pen to paper, the president said, and I quote, "If my name ever goes down into history, it'll be for this act, and my whole soul is in it." My whole soul is in it. Today, on this January day, my whole soul is in this. Bringing America together, uniting our people, uniting our nation. And I ask every American to join me in this cause. Uniting to fight the foes we face: anger, resentment and hatred, extremism, lawlessness, violence, disease, joblessness, and hopelessness. With unity, we can do great things, important things. We can right wrongs. We can put people to work in good jobs. We can teach our children in safe schools. We can overcome the deadly virus. We can reward work and rebuild the middle class and make health care secure for all. We can deliver racial justice, and we can make America once again the leading force for good in the world. I know speaking of unity can sound to some like a foolish fantasy these days. I know the forces that divide us are deep and they are real. But I also know they are not new. Our history has been a constant struggle between the American ideal, that we're all are created equal, and the harsh, ugly reality that racism, nativism, fear, demonization have long torn us apart. The battle is perennial, and victory is never assured. Through Civil War, the Great Depression, World War, 9/11, through struggle, sacrifice, and setbacks, our better angels have always prevailed. In each of these moments, enough of us have come together to carry all of us forward. And we can do that now. History, faith, and reason show the way of unity. We can see each other not as adversaries, but as neighbors. We can treat each other with dignity and respect. We can join forces, stop the shouting, and lower the temperature. For without unity, there is no peace, only bitterness and fury. No progress, only exhausting outrage. No nation, only a state of chaos. This is our historic moment of crisis and challenge, and unity is the path forward. And we must meet this moment as the United States of America. If we do that, I guarantee you we will not fail. We have never, ever, ever, ever failed in America when we've acted together. And so today, at this time, in this place, let's start afresh, all of us. Let's begin to listen to one another again, hear one another, see one another, show respect to one another. Politics doesn't have to be a raging fire, destroying everything in its path. Every disagreement doesn't have to be a cause for total war. And we must reject the culture in which facts themselves are manipulated and even manufactured. My fellow Americans, we have to be different than this. America has to be better than this. And I believe America is so much better than this. Just look around. Here we stand in the shadow of the Capitol Dome, as was mentioned earlier, completed amid the Civil War, when the Union itself was literally hanging in the balance. Yet we endured. We prevailed. Here we stand, looking out on the great mall where Dr. King spoke of his dream. Here we stand where 108 years ago, at another inaugural, thousands of protesters tried to block brave women marching for the right to vote. And today, we mark the swearing in of the first woman in American history elected to national office, Vice President Kamala Harris. Don't tell me things can't change. Here we stand across the Potomac from Arlington Cemetery, where heroes who gave the last full measure of devotion rest in eternal peace. And here we stand, just days after a riotous mob thought they could use violence to silence the will of the people, to stop the work of our democracy, to drive us from this sacred ground. It did not happen. It will never happen. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Not ever. To all those who supported our campaign, I'm humbled by the faith you've placed in us. To all those who did not support us, let me say this. Hear me out as we move forward. Take a measure of me and my heart. If you still disagree, so be it. That's democracy. That's America. The right to dissent peaceably within the guardrails of our republic is perhaps this nation's greatest strength. Yet hear me clearly. Disagreement must not lead to disunion. And I pledge this to you. I will be a president for all Americans. All Americans. And I promise you, I will fight as hard for those who did not support me as for those who did. Many centuries ago, St. Augustine, a saint of my church, wrote that a people was a multitude defined by the common objects of their love. Defined by the common objects of their love. What are the common objects we as Americans love that define us as Americans? I think we know. Opportunity, security, liberty, dignity, respect, honor, and yes, the truth. Recent weeks and months have taught us a painful lesson. There is truth and there are lies. Lies told for power and for profit. And each of us has a duty and a responsibility as citizens, as Americans, and especially as leaders. Leaders who have pledged to honor our Constitution and protect our nation, to defend the truth and defeat the lies. Look, I understand that many of my fellow Americans view the future with fear and trepidation. I understand they worry about their jobs. I understand, like my dad, they lay at bed at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering, can I keep my health care? Can I pay my mortgage? Thinking about their families, about what comes next. I promise you, I get it. But the answer is not to turn inward, to retreat into competing factions, distrusting those who don't look like you, or worship the way you do, or don't get their news from the same sources you do. We must end this uncivil war that pits red against blue, rural versus urban, conservative versus liberal. We can do this if we open our souls instead of hardening our hearts, if we show a little tolerance and humility, and if we're willing to stand in the other person's shoes, as my mom would say, just for a moment, stand in their shoes. Because here's the thing about life. There's no accounting for what fate will deal you. Some days, when you need a hand. There are other days when we're called to lend a hand. That's how it has to be. That's what we do for one another. And if we are this way, our country will be stronger, more prosperous, more ready for the future. And we can still disagree. My fellow Americans, in the work ahead of us, we're going to need each other. We need all our strength to persevere through this dark winter. We're entering what may be the toughest and deadliest period of the virus. We must set aside politics and finally face this pandemic as one nation. One nation. And I promise you this, as the Bible says, weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. We will get through this together. Together. Look, folks, all my colleagues I serve with in the House and the Senate up here, we all understand the world is watching all of us today. So here's my message to those beyond our borders. America has been tested, and we've come out stronger for it. We will repair our alliances and engage with the world once again, not to meet yesterday's challenges, but today's and tomorrow's challenges. And we'll lead not merely by the example of our power, but by the power of our example. We'll be a strong and trusted partner for peace, progress, and security. Look, you all know we've been through so much in this nation. And my first act as president, I'd like to ask you to join me in a moment of silent prayer. Remember all those who we lost in this past year to the pandemic. Those 400,000 fellow Americans, moms, dads, husbands, wives, sons, daughters, friends, neighbors, and co-workers. We'll honor them by becoming the people and the nation we know we can and should be. So I ask you, let's say a silent prayer for those who've lost their lives and those left behind, and for our country. Amen. Folks, this is a time of testing. We face an attack on our democracy and on truth, a raging virus, growing inequity, the sting of systemic racism, a climate in crisis, America's role in the world. Any one of these would be enough to challenge us in profound ways. But the fact is, we face them all at once, presenting this nation with one of the gravest responsibilities we've had. Now we're going to be tested. Are we going to step up, all of us? It's time for boldness, for there's so much to do. And this is certain. I promise you, we will be judged, you and I, by how we resolve these cascading crises of our era. We will rise to the occasion is the question. Will we master this rare and difficult hour? Will we meet our obligations and pass along a new and better world to our children? I believe we must. I'm sure you do as well. I believe we will. And when we do, we'll write the next great chapter in the history of the United States of America, the American story. A story that might sound something like a song that means a lot to me. It's called American Anthem. There's one verse that stands out, at least for me, and it goes like this. The work and prayers of century have brought us to this day. What shall be our legacy? What will our children say? Let me know in my heart when my days are through. America, America, I gave my best to you. Let's us add our own work and prayers to the unfolding story of our great nation. If we do this, then when our days are through, our children and our children's children will say of us, they gave their best, they did their duty, they healed a broken land. My fellow Americans, I close the day where I began, with the sacred oath. Before God and all of you, I give you my word. I will always level with you. I will defend the Constitution. I'll defend our democracy. I'll defend America. And I'll give all of you, keep everything I do in your service, thinking not of power, but of possibilities, not of personal interest, but the public good. And together, we shall write an American story of hope, not fear, of unity, not division, of light, not darkness, a story of decency and dignity, love and healing, greatness and goodness. May this be the story that guides us, the story that inspires us, and the story that tells ages yet to come that we answered the call of history. We met the moment. Democracy and hope, truth and justice did not die on our watch but thrived. That America secured liberty at home and stood once again as a beacon to the world. That is what we owe our forebears, one another, and generation to follow. So, with purpose and resolve, we turn to those tasks of our time, sustained by faith, driven by conviction, and devoted to one another and the country we love with all our hearts. May God bless America, and may God protect our troops. Thank you, America.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated.
Let's bring back in Bill Crane. Thought the speech was strong, forceful, eloquent. I think may have been the best speech I've ever heard Joe Biden give. I want to get your thoughts.
I've seen Joe Biden give a lot of speeches. His heart was definitely in this one, and I liked the length. 15 minutes, or actually closer to 14 minutes. Shorter is better, as long as, again, you can hit the right marks. And I think on hope, on unity, and on a brighter day for America, he hit those marks.
He said politics doesn't have to be a raging fire. I mean, he didn't talk about Donald Trump, but I think he talked a lot about Donald Trump. He said we want to defeat the lies. Trump, of course, kept saying that this virus was going to disappear. Biden said a silent prayer for 400,000 people who've died. Definitely a stark contrast.
Well, I thought the best line was, and it got the best applause, was his reference that facts aren't something you can bend and twist. Facts are facts, and hoping that we base our policy making and our discussions going forward on facts that can be mutually agreed on.
Let's listen into Garth Brooks now.
I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. If I can ask you to sing this last verse with me, not just the people here, but the people at home, at work, as one, united. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see.
Amen.
Let's bring back in Bill Crane. Bill, one of the other things that President Biden said was he's going to be the president for all Americans, but you're there in Georgia where, you know, it was just that race there in that state separated by about 11,000 votes or so, 12,000 votes, very closely divided. You have a country that's very much divided. You have a lot of people that don't want to accept him as president of the United States. How difficult a task will that be for him?
Well, it's easier than unity is much easier to speak of than it is to accomplish. So without a crisis forcing us together, as 9/11 did for George Bush first year into a very controversial election, 2000 to 2001, I think the vice president will need to use things like the pandemic, the successful application of the vaccines that are going to be pushed out with a $20 billion expansion as tangible ways to show Americans, regardless of your party, regardless of your belief system, that he's there for you as well. And that will come with time or it won't. But I also think there might be some opportunities with speeches, as Vice President Biden, now President Biden, likes to give, addressing the other side, perhaps looking at a task force on election security as it relates to particularly the mail-in and absentee ballots for the next election cycle, to cause those who believe the last election was stolen to understand that the system is secure and does deliver free and fair elections.
Bill Crane with analysis for us. Let's check back in with Nathan King at the White House. Nathan, you've been covering the past president, Donald Trump, for 4 years now, even before he ran for president. You know, one of the things he talked about in this speech, disunity, rage, resentment, it seemed like that was kind of ginned up during the 4 years of the Trump Before we get to the question, let's listen to the poet laureate quickly.
When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace. In the norms and notions of what just isn't always just is. And yet the dawn is ours before we knew it. Somehow we do it. Somehow we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. We, the successors of a country and a time where a skinny black girl descended from slaves and raised by a single mother can dream of becoming president, only to find herself reciting for one. And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge our union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first, we must first put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true. That even as we grieved, we grew, that even as we hurt, we hoped, that even as we tired, we tried, that we'll forever be tied together, victorious, not because we will never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division. Scripture tells us to envision that everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. If we're to live up to our own time, then victory won't lie in the blade, but in all the bridges we've made. That is the promised glade, the hill we climb, if only we dare it, because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. We've seen a force that would shatter our nation rather than share it, would destroy our country if it meant delaying democracy. And this effort very nearly succeeded. But while democracy can be periodically delayed, it can never be permanently defeated. In this truth, in this faith we trust, for while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us. This is the era of just redemption. We feared it at its inception. We did not feel prepared to be the heirs of such a terrifying hour, but within it we found the power to author a new chapter, to offer hope and laughter to ourselves. So, while once we asked, how could we possibly prevail over catastrophe? Now we assert, how could catastrophe possibly prevail over us? We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be, a country that is bruised but whole, benevolent but bold, fierce and free. We will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation, because we know our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. Our blunders become their burdens. But one thing is certain: if we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright. So let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left. With every breath from my bronze-pounded chest, we will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. We will rise from the gold-limbed hills of the West. We will rise from the wind-swept Northeast, where our forefathers first realized revolution. We will rise from the lake-rimmed cities of the Midwestern states. We will rise from the sun-baked South. We will rebuild reconcile and recover in every known nook of our nation, in every corner called our country. Our people, diverse and beautiful, will emerge battered and beautiful. When day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it. For there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it.
Amanda Gorman there speaking, a young woman, a poet, activist in her early 20s. She is the youngest poet to read at a presidential inauguration, talking about the new day blooming, as illustrated by the new president of the United States. And let's talk a little bit about that, Nathan. As we were talking earlier, it seems like the former president fed that disunity, rage, and resentment that the new president was speaking about. How does he get the genie back into the bottle?
Well, I mean, that's a very good question. It was a very, very good speech in terms of calling for unity. I think he mentioned unity 8, 9 times. I think Donald Trump mentioned it once in his bizarre inaugural address 4 years ago. Remember, George W. Bush, after listening to that speech, said that was some weird expletive because it was different. And this is so different. Some of the words actually did chart a course, I think, for the Biden administration. He called out white supremacy right there on the dais, looking across the mall, of course, all the way to Lincoln. He talked about Lincoln and signing the proclamation to free the slaves, Emancipation Proclamation, and said, my soul is in it. Said, my soul is going to be in this. So he called out what needs to be done. It wasn't just words. I think what was really interesting for me was when he talked about the uncivil war that the United States is in, that we are not every bit of politics has to be a war. You are not adversaries, but neighbors. And I think that gives a little path forward to try and heal the wounds, not just with words, but perhaps by actions. Look, he said he's going to be president for all Americans. He said he's going to reach out to Republicans in Congress. Politically, he needs to do so anyway. But if he manages to change the tone in the same way Donald Trump did, but completely the opposite, then that may give an avenue. Let's face it, the country is exhausted. I mean, you know, the Twitter feed that didn't stop, the rhetoric that didn't stop, the partisanship on cable news and on social media, the events of January the 6th, the election, it never stops. Americans are pretty exhausted, and I haven't even mentioned COVID, so maybe this is a window of opportunity. We'll wait and see. It does help, of course, that Joe Biden is not just president, but there's a democratically controlled House of Representatives and Senate, albeit by razor-thin margins. We'll have to wait and see. In a way, the ball is not in his court. It's with Republicans. And, you know, we've yet to hear from some, although I have to say to you, as Joe Biden was giving those words about unity and coming together and a hopefulness, one Republican congresswoman tweeted out, it's time to impeach Joe Biden.
Yeah, we're still going to see that. There's no doubt about it. But talk to us about Mitch McConnell and his address the other day, because it seems to me that McConnell, also an institutionalist like Biden, would much prefer clarity rather than chaos. Even though Trump was in the same party, he just never knew where he was coming from half the time. Even this most recent deal, COVID relief, how Trump came out and said it should be $2,000 after they'd agreed on a lower price tag. Is there an opening?
Watchers of Mitch McConnell know that he is a political chameleon and will move with the times. It is no coincidence that Mitch McConnell basically started to move away from President Trump when he lost the November election. Let's face it, that happened. I mean, Trump didn't help it by being all over the map and trying to insert himself. But you're right, Mitch McConnell has basically said over the last couple of days, January the 6th, the insurrection was fueled by the president, Donald Trump, former president now, and his enablers. And he was talking about members of his own caucus, remember, as well. The Josh Hawleys, the Ted Cruzes, who decided to side with the president even after the insurrection. So you know, let's just see what happens. But remember, he's going to be a minority leader now, and he wants to hold his coalition together, in large part because he wants to oppose some of the legislation that's going to be coming through, especially on climate, potentially on immigration, especially on a big stimulus bill that will give money to states and local governments. We'll wait and see. But this politically, of course, is advantageous for Mitch McConnell and other Republicans right now to seem to give the president a chance, while also the political fortunes have changed.
Let's bring in Sean Caleb's. Sean, I want to get your thoughts on the speech, but one of the things that struck me is as he went through the litany of some of the issues he's going to be addressing as president of the United States, he talked about the virus silently stalking the country, of course, an economy in tatters, cries for racial justice, cries from the planet about its own survival, political extremism, white supremacy. I mean, it was a laundry list of issues he's going to have to tackle once he hits the White House today. Talk to us about his agenda and also your thoughts on this speech.
Well, I thought it was a very powerful speech, at times very forceful, getting across the fact that he is really not only touting unity, reaching across the aisle and trying to bring this polarized nation together, but also empathy. And that is something that has been simply void in the White House the past 4 years. We heard it today when he talked about the coronavirus claiming more than 400,000 lives. We heard it when he talked about he understands why a certain group of people in the United States are very frustrated. They lie awake looking at the ceiling at night, wondering, how am I going to pay my mortgage? How am I going to keep my job? But Biden said, look, don't lash out at people who look different than you or act different than you or worship different than you. Give me a chance. If you don't like what I do as president, fine, you can dissent, but do it peacefully. He talked about what unfolded January 6th. And to a point, this is what he had to say about democracy being challenged in a very forceful way and emerging at this point and moving forward.
Today, we celebrate the triumph not of a candidate, but of a cause, the cause of democracy. The people, the will of the people has been heard, and the will of the people has been heeded. We've learned again that democracy is precious, democracy is fragile, and at this hour, my friends, democracy has prevailed.
And we still have far to go, much to restore, and challenges lie ahead. And Mike, what you're talking about earlier, he said a plague threatens the country, racial injustice, domestic terrorism, white supremacy. So finding a way to unify those people who are so disjointed from so many other people in the United States is certainly going to be a challenge. And I'm also kind of fascinated by the fact he never used President Trump's name once, but certainly talked about the outgoing president and then the misinformation and the alternative facts, twisting truths. And it was interesting when we heard Trump leave the Joint Air Base at Andrews earlier today, and he talked about wishing the new administration luck and said that he was leaving a solid foundation for him. Well, you did not get the sense of any kind of solid foundation when you heard Joe Biden talk, basically almost trying to lift this nation out of ashes, if you will, and not just domestically, but also going to reach out to neighbors overseas. He said not to build relationships in the past, but to build relationships for today and for the future, something I think that was very important as well. And again, talking about what happened January 6th. That was woven in and out of this 22-minute speech. That's how long I timed it. That unity, we face this domestic terrorism. With unity, we can come together and move forward. But we have to start fresh and listen to each other. Politics doesn't have to be as volatile and as ugly as it has been, and to reject manufactured facts. These are the things that Nathan King talked about a while ago. These are the things that are going to be played out for the next 24 hours on all the news services here in the United States and overseas as well. But I thought a very effective speech, and also a nod to Kamala Harris. This is someone who went to school at Howard University, then on to Yale. 6 years ago, she married her husband, Doug Emhoff, and she has now 2 stepchildren who lovingly call her Mamala instead of Kamala. And Biden talked about the fact that we have come far. Don't tell me that change can't happen, pointing at Kamala Harris and saying, look, this is the first black woman and of Southeast Asian descent as well to be vice president of the United States. And by all accounts, she's going to have a very real role as vice president. Perhaps not just following around the president and nodding politely as we have seen in the past 4 years. She is a force. She was a senator for some time and has a long history of being very effective when she puts her mind to something. So I think that that's going to be very fascinating to watch unfold, to see that dynamic, to see how these two get along. You know, you talked about that loving fist bump that they had together. They had their moment of sparks during the debate, but perhaps it was that divide that brought them closer together, and they certainly have a challenge ahead of them, unifying the country, finding a way to push through all these measures that they are proposing, everything from climate change to making it easier on relief of student loans for those who are completely saddled by it, and of course dealing with the people who feel ostracized in the United States, finding a way to deal with the number of people who are just frustrated and furious. Donald Trump portrayed himself as an outsider, but in the end, he really caved into that in a huge way. One of the last things he did was revoking the measure that allows his former administration officials to lobby. So much for draining the swamp and so much for coming in as being an outsider and saying, we're going to make things better. But he has to put all that aside, Biden, and move forward, working with Mitch McConnell, who has proven to be very effective at keeping any kind of Democratic measures from even reaching the floor for a vote on a chance of passage. So it's going to be, we're going to see that unfold, and perhaps the Republicans are going to get a sense of what it's been like for Democrats the past 7 years as they sit there and watch measures that they want not coming to fruition and other things perhaps feeling that they're being shoved down their throat. But that is going to be a fine line Biden has to walk.
And we're watching right now as Kamala Harris makes her way through the halls of the Capitol that just 2 weeks ago was overrun by rioters. We saw President Biden and First Lady Dr. Jill Biden leaving as well. We just saw moments ago Barack Obama, the former president, there. So it's been quite a celebration. It will continue. They will be marching down Pennsylvania Avenue. But let's talk about moving forward. The U.S. and China still locked in a trade dispute with dozens of tariffs still in place. John Gong is joining us now from Beijing. He's a professor of economics at the University of International Business and Economics. John, let's start with this. I mean, there was a period during the Trump administration where we saw almost daily actions aimed at China, whether it was anti-China rhetoric to actual almost whipsaw actions like the closing of the Chinese consulate in Houston, which came with just 72 hours notice. So there's going to be obviously a sigh of relief in Beijing. Give me your sense of how they will welcome this new administration.
Well, it's not just throughout the administration. I think especially so during the lasting the waning days of the Trump administration, especially coming from the State Department, Mike Pompeo. In my view, he's engaged in sort of a personal vendetta against China. Some people call him being engaged in foreign policy vandalism. These sort of things are so far Beijing has been putting up with, and we haven't seen strong responses from Beijing. The response is very measured and restrained. Certainly, I think from China's perspective, we welcome the Biden administration. At least I think some of the policies during the Trump administration will be reversed. But to be honest with you, as I listen to Biden's speech, I think his call for healing and for unity is just tall order. You're talking about speaking to 70 million people who voted against him. Now he talked about that lie, right? He talked about calling out that lie without mentioning Trump, the lie about this election being stolen, pervaded by the Trump administration. Now remember, there are more than 140 congressmen and representatives rooting for that lie. If the Congress was not controlled by the Democrats, this election is really likely going to be stolen. So, it's a tall order. I think my view is that without accountability, without actually, sorting out the responsibilities, especially I think the the Senate should continue the impeachment against President Trump. Without doing all of these things, I think it's kind of difficult to move ahead, and healing is also going to be difficult.
Lady Gaga talking to former President Barack Obama, who want to be a fly on the wall right there. Let's talk about the Phase 1 deal. It was agreed upon. Can that be built upon moving forward?
I think China is still going to follow up with the first phase agreement, although I don't think there will be a second phase. This is pretty much a Trump thing, and President Biden, now we can say President Biden is not going to inherit this. But I think there will be talks, dialogues regarding the trade issues. I think the new Secretary of State, Mr. Blinken, has said that there will be talks about, eventually removing all these tariffs. But for the moment, it looks like it's not going to be quick actions. You have to muster some political capital to work out these things. I think there's quite wide consensus in Washington right now that everybody has to be tough on China. But that's okay. I think the first priority for the Biden administration is really the domestic issues. The first 100 days is all about COVID, COVID, COVID. I think his 4-year power will be very much judged by his performance in the first half year. So I think it's imperative for Mr. Biden to roll out the vaccination programs in order to introduce those measures to fight against the COVID, and hopefully can turn things around. I mean, you mentioned a whole list of issues, a laundry list of issues, and I think right now everything hinges on tackling this COVID thing. Without getting this thing behind us, there will be no economy, there will be no other issues getting addressed. So it's all about COVID right now, in my view.
John, briefly, if you can, we had Obama's pivot to Asia. We had Trump's America's First. What are you likely to see in terms of a strategy or a profile from the Biden administration?
I think two things are happening. One is that the Biden administration is probably going to return to some of the things that the Obama administration initiated. That's the pivot to Asia thing. The second thing is that in today's speech, President Biden said that he's going to repair the alliances with his partners, probably in Asia as well as in European Union. So I think these two things probably will be a market change away from President Trump's foreign policy. We're going to see more cooperation, more coordination policies probably across America's allies in Europe and as well as in Asia. But on the other hand, I think there's also a lot of room for cooperation between the two great powers, even though America and China are indeed engaged in what I call a great competition. I mean, the things that both countries can cooperate is actually quite long. So I think we're going to see a relationship that is a mixed bag of things, with competition, hopefully peaceful competition and fair and square competition, right, as well as areas of close cooperation.
All right, John Gong joining us from Beijing with his take on today. We thank him for that. He kind of set the table for us by talking about the European Union, with the entire world watching Washington. What are the expectations for the Biden administration in Europe? Let's go to Lucy Huff. She's in Brussels. Lucy?
Well, there's been a huge sigh of relief here in Europe, particularly watching that speech from now President Biden, drawing comparisons, I think, with 4 years ago, when, of course, we had that message from then President Trump talking of America first. From this day forward, it is America first. A very different message that we got from President Biden today, one of unity. There was not a great deal about foreign policy in that speech, but certainly a message that America wants to reassert itself as a force for good in the world. That will be music to the ears of European leaders after 4 very challenging years of the Trump administration. We've had warm congratulations from the prime ministers of Spain, of Greece. EU presidents this morning, speaking in the European Parliament, spoke of a new dawn, a chance to reset that old transatlantic alliance and work on a new agenda. His EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said that she was looking forward to working with President Joe Biden with a number of shared policy issues on their agenda.
Barack Obama now leaving, hugging some of the participants there. How does the EU envision a future with the United States, and what kind of challenges remain?
Well, there is certainly, as I say, a lot of areas of alignment. President Biden says we know that on day 1 of his administration, he will rejoin the Paris Climate Accord. He wants to work to rejoin the Iran nuclear deal, as well as re-engaging with multilateral organizations such as the WHO and NATO alliance, of course, which has been heavily criticized by President Trump. So again, lots of areas where there can be cooperation, renewed cooperation. But certainly there is a wariness here in Europe. There was a word from EU Council President Charles Michel this morning that America is not the same, that it may not be the trusted ally it once was, that President Biden is likely to be consumed with his domestic agenda, dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic and rebuilding America's economy. And as a result, foreign policy may not be high on his list, at least in the early stages. So Europe can either wait or it can continue to find ways to assert its own independence. The word is strategic autonomy here. So whilst there will be certainly some healing, there is a long way to go, and that relationship may not be healed in the short term.
Yeah, lots of challenges ahead for the new president. Lucy Huffforce in Brussels, thanks so much. Jim Spellman, I want to talk to you a little bit about today, because one of the things that was so different from years past, and you talked about actually going to these inaugurations as a youngster growing up here. One of the things that struck me today is one of the things you look for is, oh, that's this dignitary or that dignitary, but you had to look under the mask. Is that who I think it is? So different than years past, and that's going to be the case when it comes to a parade as well.
Yeah, and you know, one of the things that is very eerie out here is how quiet it is. Normally, during a speech, at all the big moments, there would be applause that would echo throughout the city. But the only thing we can hear is the occasional siren going by out here. I'm at one of the many checkpoints here in Washington, D.C. Almost all of the people that you can see here are either law enforcement, National Guard, or other members of the press. But I did speak to one woman, a Biden supporter, moments after he took the oath. And one thing that has struck me about Joe Biden throughout the final stages of the campaign and the transition is how much the tone really does come from the top. When we've spoken to supporters of former President Donald Trump, you hear that anger directed often at Democrats, at the press, at others. When you speak to supporters of Joe Biden, you do hear them echoing that message of unity. Listen.
Well, I personally have been exhausted by the last 4 years, but I just hope we can start working together. I mean, stuff needs to get done. We're in the middle of a pandemic. Things aren't getting any better. They're only getting worse. We don't know if there's any reserved vaccine. I mean, we just need to hurry up and get everyone vaccinated and get back on with life.
But as we've heard throughout the day, that will be much easier said than done. I mean, we have the twin symbolism. National Guard troops on every corner here, largely because of the violence at the U.S. Capitol 2 weeks ago, and in other directions, empty streets because of the pandemic. It's a very unusual inauguration with very unusual challenges lying ahead, Mike.
Unusual in another respect as well. As we look at Kamala Harris, I went back and revisited Promise Me, Dad, the Joe Biden book, where he talked about how his natural inclination was to turn down the offer to be vice president because some former vice presidents had said it was the same as going into the witness protection program. Nelson Rockefeller said you just go to a bunch of funerals. A lot of people had downplayed it. Biden, of course, excelled as vice president under Barack Obama. And Mike Pence was always that guy right by Donald Trump's side. And there he is today. And it's almost as though he's on a deserted island. I talked to GOP person last week who said he really doesn't have a future in the Republican Party because, you know, a lot of Republicans see him turning his back on Trump. So talk to us about this day and how strange it is for him taking part in this and Kamala Harris's future.
Well, I think, you know, when you look at Kamala Harris, I think she realizes the historic opportunities here. Of course, as the first woman, the first black woman, the first person of Asian descent to hold this office, there's a lot of history here. But clearly, given Joe Biden's age and the dynamics of the Democratic Party, there are a lot of openings here. So I think there will be some, you know, basically politics at play as she tries to find a role. But probably since Dick Cheney, the vice president of George W. Bush on, there's the potential there for that to be a much different job than it has been in the past. So some of those quotes you mentioned. And I think that you see a lot of excitement in the Democratic base that is because of Kamala Harris. And you can't overstress how important black voters were in Joe Biden's victory. He has a long history with that community, but there was extra energy that was brought there by Kamala Harris. And I think we can expect to see her try to capitalize on that to add some excitement to the message of unity that's coming from President Joe Biden. Mike?
And of course, black voters in South Carolina really resuscitated his campaign when it was really on the ropes. Let's check in with Sean Calebs. Sean, give us a sense of what we're likely to see with this administration, because I think Jim talked about Kamala Harris and her role. Biden says it's going to be very similar to what he did when he was vice president to Barack Obama. He always wanted to be the last person in the room. She's going to be that person moving forward as well.
Well, I think you're exactly right, and I think that they're going to pick up on that. And a lot of the measures that you saw the Barack Obama-Biden team push through between 2008 and 2016, perhaps you're going to see a lot more of that, including the Paris Climate Accord. But I thought it was interesting that Biden said, look, you know, to people who didn't vote for him, listen to what I have to say. If you don't like it, you can dissent peacefully all you want. You know, that's part of the democratic effort here in the United States. But clearly trying to get across that, because Donald Trump isn't going away. He just went to Florida. He doesn't have Twitter at his fingertips now, but he'll probably find some mechanism where he's able to get his word out. And he has tens of millions of fervent supporters across the United States. So how difficult is it going to be for Biden to push through his agenda in the first 100 days if Trump does have that platform? But remember, he's also been impeached, and that could really cut the legs out from him under him in a huge way. But for a huge percentage of this country, I don't know how much, obviously, but a lot of people feel like the long national nightmare is over. You know, we now have someone in who's going to be more calm. You can certainly gauge from day to day what's going to happen. It's not like the sky is going to fall, or one day if someone goes against the president and that person is just relegated to an enemies list. It's certainly not going to happen with Biden. He has 37 years experience as a senator and a vice president here on the Hill. He knows all the movers and shakers within Congress, and that's going to be a big part of moving forward. But Kamala Harris is certainly going to play a very important part, and they have to walk that fine line between progressives who basically want revolution, let's get something out there right now, and more mainstream Democrats who say, let's just get the country back on solid footing first, then we can think about how to move forward. And then, of course, Mitch McConnell and the effective leadership in the House. It's not going to be easy. It's all, you know, pomp and circumstance today, smiles, pats on the back. Yeah, we support you. But let's see how this really unfolds once these programs are brought to the Senate and to the House of Representatives, and they try to move forward.
Okay, we're watching former President Bill Clinton making his way out of the Capitol now. His wife had preceded him. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton left quite a bit before him. Bill Clinton, always known as a glad-hander and a big talker, spending a lot of time with the folks there before he heads out. Outgoing U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is barred from entering China. The foreign ministry in Beijing announcing sanctions against Pompeo and other top officials of the Trump administration. It accuses them of hatred against China and disrupting China-U.S. relations. The group also includes Trump advisor Peter Navarro, the outgoing national security advisor, and the outgoing UN ambassador. They are banned from visiting the Chinese mainland, Hong Kong, and Macau, or doing business with China. Well, let's head back over to Nathan King. Nathan, talk a little bit about that, because one of the things about that's interesting about that is Peter Navarro. I remember his first trip to China was in his capacity in the Trump administration. He'd never been there before, and it was obviously very anti-China from the get-go. Talk to us about this action by Beijing.
Well, I mean, you know, it's interesting this happens as they leave office. And by the way, I understand Steve Bannon's on that list as well, the former chief strategist who also ran a very sort of anti-China website, radio program, and was financed, as you know, by a Chinese dissident here. Steve Bannon, of course, was pardoned by President Trump in the early hours of his last morning in office. Look, you could see this coming because essentially Mike Pompeo, along with the other China hawks like Peter Navarro in the Trump administration, had essentially waged a crusade, if you like, not just against China, but trying to separate the People's Republic of China from the Communist Party. In fact, they never said China in the last few months in office. It was always the CCP. And as you know, Mike Pompeo was the driving force, along with Peter Navarro, in terms of a get tough policy when it came to sanctions on Hong Kong, Xinjiang. We saw moves over the last 24 hours on that, and also really sort of putting into question the one China principle in terms of Taiwan as well, pushing for more diplomatic contacts, which, as you know, is a real red line for Beijing and used to be here in Washington as well. Listen, let's look at this current administration and see what they do as well, because it's been very interesting. Tony Blinken, who's going to be Secretary of State, confirmed in the next couple of days, it looks like, basically when asked about China and the Trump policy, said, I think that the Trump administration largely got the China policy right, but the tactics wrong. Now that is quite incredible thing to say as an incoming Secretary of State, and might indicate the fact that there is a little more consensus on China, especially in the US Congress, than perhaps people in China and Chinese leaders around the world have taken on board over the last few months. Now, this may be posturing. You know, China doesn't vote in this country, and it's easy to bash China, especially in these COVID times. The Trump administration tried to deflect as well, but it was a very interesting move today. I would also look obviously at Jake Sullivan, the incoming National Security Advisor, because he very much says, look, we can't keep on bashing China while we're screwing up here at home, and our best way of competing with China is to actually be strong domestically. So it's going to be a very interesting debate, but I'm not surprised that Beijing has taken this move. We have not seen rhetoric and policy against China from an administration, especially in the last few months. You know, this ranges from everything from trade to TikTok, from WeChat to sanctions. You know, it was almost a neo-McCarthyite language, and we saw even reprisals against Asian Americans because of the rhetoric. So I'm not surprised this is taken, but it's going to be very interesting to see how this affects these former administration officials and also the companies that they may end up being associated with. Who would hire Mike Pompeo on a board, for example, if you have interest in China?
Very good question indeed. Once again, we get images of former President Bill Clinton still spending a lot of time chatting with folks as he makes his way out of the Capitol. Let's bring back in Bill Crane. Let's talk a little bit about Donald Trump. This is obviously Joe Biden's day, but Sean Caleb says he's not going away, but he doesn't have the bully pulpit he had. He doesn't have the social media outrage he has. He also has an impeachment looming. And there aren't a lot of attorneys really chomping at the bit to represent him in this impeachment proceeding. It looks kind of like a difficult path forward for Trump in many respects.
Politically, personally, and financially. The president has multiple large debts that his enterprises own that are coming due. Large balloon payment on the Trump Tower in New York of around $220 million, where he's only been paying interest payments on that since the 2012 refinance. Several large customers and corporations have announced they won't be doing business with him anymore, including the city of New York. So there's no real easy path ahead, even if it's a cushy existence down there in Palm Springs and Palm Beach and Mar-a-Lago. I think the president may take some time to kind of recollect his personal world, get his businesses in line, and, of course, defend himself from whatever charges do come, whether it's a Senate impeachment trial or criminal proceedings that might come from the New York Attorney's Office regarding his income taxes, or potentially investigations into direct links between the Trump campaign or 527 supporting the Trump campaign and the attack and assault on the nation's capital on January the 6th.
He's also talking about perhaps starting another new party, the Patriot Party. How fractured is the Republican Party right now?
I wouldn't say having been observing the GOP for some time, that it feels as fractured as post-Watergate, but it's close. That was a rebuilding time, and many thought the GOP would never be able to elect a president again until a fellow named Ronald Reagan came along. So I believe the GOP will be doing some soul searching, and Donald Trump may find that a third party or a cult of personality is the better fit for him, like Ross Perot, who ran for president unsuccessfully twice in the 1990s.
We got about 30 seconds. Relationships matter here in Washington, D.C. Biden has known Mitch McConnell for a long time. How much is that going to help him?
It helps him a lot. They've worked together in the Senate for more than 30 years. There's no one on the House leadership team, on the Senate leadership team, certainly not in the incoming administration, that hasn't had some prior existing relationship with Joe Biden. He does, as a result of that, hit the ground running.
All right, Bill Crane joining us from Decatur, Georgia. Thanks so much. And thank you for watching. I'm Mike Walter. Our live coverage of the U.S. inaugural events plus reaction from around the world will continue throughout the day. Stay with CGTN.